2 of the November 3rd, 2020 Board of Commissioners work session. Here in the room, we have Vice Chair Commissioner Dick Skelton, Commissioner Jerry Willey, and myself, Chair Harrington. And in Zoom land, we have both Commissioner Roy Rogers and Commissioner Pam Treese. We have a very full agenda. We'll see how much of it we're able to get through this afternoon, given the late hour. Next up on our agenda is the draft state and federal legislative agendas for 2021.
Thank you. Chair Harrington, members of the committee, Elizabeth Mazzara-Myers, Interim Government Relations Director. On the line on Zoom, we've got Aaron Doyle, Jajit Nagra, and Paige Spence, all Government Relations Managers. Next slide. So I just want to remind you where we are in this process. Back on October 20th, we came to you with a first draft of the state and federal legislative agenda for both Washington County and Clean Water Services. Today, next slide, today is a next look at that with some more time still for you to provide input and direction to the team. We do have here on this slide our extended calendar, if you will. I wanted to note that there was this morning some updated news. We do know now that December 7th through 11th, Senate committee hearings will be happening during legislative days. December 15th through 18th, the House committees will be meeting during legislative days, and then the pre-session filing deadline is December 21st. So not updated in this calendar because we just got those this morning, but we do have that information now. Our plan is to have this conversation with you today, come back on the 17th for final approval of the agenda. Next slide. So like I said, last time, October 20th, we were here to provide you a first look at the draft agenda. Today, we want to do a bit of a deeper dive by answering these questions for you. What are the proposed legislative priorities? Why are these the identified priorities? And how will we move these priorities forward? Next slide. Sorry, I can't turn this without. And like last time, part 1 will be your proposed state agenda, part 2 will be your proposed federal agenda, and part 3 will be proposed clean water, both state and federal. Next slide, thank you. So you'll find these on page 3 of your state legislative agenda. Just briefly, it's the priorities that we're proposing are around COVID-19, relief and recovery, health outcomes for our community, investments in regional transportation, workforce development, funding and cost recovery for a variety of programs in public safety, and a priority around homelessness and affordable housing. Next slide. So we're going to go ahead and jump into these proposed priorities. I'll take this first one, which is to identify and secure funding and constituent relief for all COVID-19 related programs and services. You'll see that we have this repeated both in your state and your federal agenda. I want to note here that the state level issues and priorities are, in this case, is very deeply woven with the federal issue. And so I'm going to just take a pause on talking about this more deeply until we get to the federal agenda, because the state priority falls down from the federal. So just know that we're going to be talking more about this briefly. So I'll move you to the next slide, and Health and Human Services. This is Paige, and again, you can find this priority on page 6 of your state agenda.
Great, can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect, thank you. Good afternoon, Chair and Commissioners, and Chair Harrington. May I also compliment you on that voting sash, reminding our community that today is election day, and that's important. It's great. So as Elizabeth set out, I will first describe what the priorities are that HHS has brought forward, why they're important, and how your government relations team will aim to reach these goals on behalf of the departments and your board. So first, as you see, HHS has 3 priorities. The first priority is to support the flexible policies and funding mechanisms to improve health and human services outcome for our communities. So underneath that, we've got these 3 buckets. The first one, seeking sufficient funding for existing county programs. So this session, the proposed asks under this first priority will focus on the 2 funding stream requests that your board supported during the short session, and one that will be new for 2021. The first of these, under seeking sufficient funding, is county mental health, including aid and assist. As you'll recall, we discussed this in 2020 before the short session. The state's behavioral health system remains fragmented, overloaded, underfunded, and inequitable in access and outcomes. As you'll recall from our discussions during short session, the Oregon State Hospital has also struggled to keep up with increased court-ordered admissions of patients from the criminal justice system. So for the second session in a row, with your approval, Government Relations will support the Oregon Health Authority's budget request to increase outpatient county services to meet the immediate needs of people who have been arrested and court-ordered for mental health services under Oregon's aid and assist laws, and provide for better coordination between the courts, the state hospital, and our county mental health and substance use disorder service providers for people who have intensive behavioral health needs. And how we will accomplish this is through the Ways and Means process. I'm glad to say that this is a shared priority once again with AOC, as well as our Association of County Mental Health Providers, of which we are a member, and other counties. The second under this bucket of seeking funding is, and you also saw this one during 2020, is our intellectual and developmental disability case management. This one's particularly important as a priority because the Washington County IDD program relies entirely on state funding, and over the last 2 biennia has seen cuts in funding. The state's budget exercises in May 2020 suggest cuts to the programs between 2 and 4%, and any cuts over that amount would likely result in layoffs next biennium if the DD program does not receive an increase in current funding. It's worth noting that the state sets caseload standards at 1 services coordinator to 45 cases, and here at Washington County and similarly across the state, current caseloads average 1 to 65. The major concern about the high and increasing caseload growth is over the health and safety of vulnerable children and adults, not to mention staff burnout. Again, how we will accomplish this is through the Ways and Means process, along with AOC, our Association of County Mental Health Providers, and other county government relations teams. And the third under this bucket, and this is a new one for 2021, is ensuring quality of life and basic needs for older adults and people with disabilities. And this is also important because, as you heard during the CRF presentation this morning, Washington County DAVES has been actively involved in addressing social isolation for older adults long before the pandemic. And during COVID, it's very inspiring how quickly they've been able to pivot to address these needs with Zoom trainings, text messaging services for isolated older adults, loneliness lines, peer support, and online social groups and classes. Other key funding that we will seek for these groups include home-delivered nutrition and support for older vulnerable adults at home, as well as their caregivers. Demand for these services is increasing on a daily basis given COVID, and HHS expects this trend will continue even once things open up. So we'll want to ensure continued funding for these programs and services. This will also be through the Ways and Means process in the legislature, and we are a member of an association called the Oregon Association of Area Agencies on Aging and Disabilities, which has lobby representation, and we should be well presented to make a case for these resources.
Great.
The second of the 3 HHS priorities, as you'll see on the second bullet, is ensuring that new legislative policies allow us to retain local control. This is always the goal, of course. We'll be ready to anticipate all bills that we need to review to ensure that we do retain local control. But the one in particular I wanted to bring to your attention is tobacco retail licensure. And I know your board is familiar with this topic. The reason this is a priority is because we expect that the 2020 short session bill on licensure will be reintroduced. And I do believe that that bill would have passed in 2020, but for the walkout. As you know, tobacco retail licensure is a system to prevent sales to underage folks, as well as to fund prevention policies that really have meaningful impacts on youth use of tobacco. Funding from this program can not only reduce the number of Oregon youth and young adults that become addicted to tobacco, but also helps current tobacco users quit and reduce healthcare costs. It'll be important during session to ensure that 2021 legislation will retain many of the requirements that are important for Washington County, which we did successfully include in the 2020 bill. This includes having no cap on fees, and that our local public health authorities and your board can pass requirements and enforcement mechanisms if needed above and beyond what the state may provide for. This topic is also a priority for our Public Health Association, the Coalition of Local Health Officials, and we will work this bill through the Senate and the House to ensure its passage if possible. And then the third priority is enhancing public health funding and services. We always need to ensure that we provide quality services to our community, but without unfunded mandates. And there's 2 buckets under this umbrella for this session. First, public health modernization. Very important, as you're all aware, given COVID, the pandemic has highlighted gaps in state and local public health capacity, despite investments in public health modernization. OHA, the Oregon Health Authority, has a budget request for 2021 that is health equity focused including lessons learned during the pandemic around engaging communities and developing interventions that work for and with communities to reduce health disparities. Public health modernization will challenge us for greater accountability for outcomes. The next phases of public health modernization include communicable disease and environmental health with specific accountability metrics that will continue to be monitored. Because even though COVID's getting a lot of attention, we know that other communicable diseases have not gone away while our public health system deals with COVID. We've got fewer children being vaccinated. We have continued outbreaks of shigellosis, salmonella, and other diseases that continue to need attention and that stretch or already stretched local public health workforce. This additionally is also an Oregon Health Authority budget request. So the how for getting this through session is that we will support the Oregon Health Authority budget request. And this is also a priority for our local public health association, as well as AOC, Multnomah County, and Clackamas County. And I will be coordinating with those teams to advance this through the Ways and Means process. And finally, under the bucket of enhancing public health funding, we have universally offered home visiting. This is one of my favorite topics. It's a good feel-good one. In 2019, the legislature established a new voluntary universal nurse home visiting program for all families with newborns. Washington County Public Health has not yet started to operate the program and would like to, but early adopters report insufficient funds to support the startup costs. So we will need not only startup costs, but sustained funding from the state if we're going to begin implementing this program here in Washington County. And to answer the how, the Oregon Health Authority also has a budget note for this one. And we will collaborate with our Public Health Association and again, the other counties to work this through the Ways and Means process. And I'll also note I'm particularly excited to collaborate with CBOs who are concerned with ensuring that there is a culturally responsive home visiting workforce. And that is all I have for you under the HHS umbrella today.
Great, thank you, Paige. Next slide. Next, we've got Erin Doyle.
Good afternoon, commissioners. Again, the transportation details are a little bit in anticipation of results of tonight's election. So while we do believe that a priority relating to the regional transportation infrastructure is necessary, given where the state is with the collection of gas taxes and some ongoing ODOT concerns related to their budget and how that trickles down to local government spending, the finer details of what exactly we'll be pursuing funding for will be further determined after the final vote tallies related to the local funding options for some of these projects. The big question right now is whether or not we will have the local funding monies available for the Southwest Corridor, and then how that then turns into a request for the state to bring in the state share for that project. And also there's a question that we've been working with TriMet and Metro on about the timing of when we make that request of the state as a result of the needs to have all the money kind of together as we go in for the federal application for their grant. And the state, of course, will want to be the last dollar in. And so we have to make sure that the application process and the timing process related to when the state's funds become available all align, and we'll be working with our regional partners, primarily TriMet and Metro, in making sure that we are positioned at the state legislative level to get those dollars available to the project and at the appropriate time so that we can come with a complete application to the federal government. But in the meantime, there are other major projects that are occurring in the region that we need to be considering and making sure that not just the specifics of some of the congestion relief projects are taken into consideration, but how the system as a whole is going to function, both while those projects are underway, but also while we try to make sure that our system remains both resilient, safe, and efficient, so that it's not just work in one area of the region, but also how that overflows into other areas, as well as working with other local government partners to ensure that some of our more difficult roads to deal with and more expensive projects are fully funded, with the state bringing in their appropriate share to make sure that some of our more difficult highways and state facilities are able to meet the needs of the region and not cause further complications for us. But again, after tonight's election results, when we have a better idea of what is and is not funded locally, we will then put a finer point on the finer points related to regional transportation infrastructure projects. And we will bring that back to you when we seek a finalization of the agenda, but I will be sure to provide you with that information beforehand so that you have a better idea of what's coming at you as we present this the third time. And I'm happy to end it there with that lack of clarity.
Thank you, Erin. And yeah, I just want to emphasize the point that as soon as Erin feels like she's got a good sense of what's happening, we'll be getting you something in advance of you seeing it for the first time at board. Next page, and then we have Jajit.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Chair Harrington. For the record, my name is Jajit Nagra, Government Relations Manager. Happy Election Day to you all. So I have three priorities. You're going to see two bullets there because county law library, and juvenile conciliation services, I'm going to lump together. Let's start with community corrections, our old friend community corrections. So why? Well, we're talking about service reduction and we're talking about the loss of possible FTEs if the state doesn't provide adequate funding, right? Let's go back to the short session in 2020. We were successful in getting the legislation to include $25 million statewide for community corrections. Due to the walkout, the bill is never signed. And now we're at a place where the Department of Corrections is actually, which is the state agency that oversees community corrections. Department of Corrections has a policy option package that provides for $11.7 million statewide for community corrections. So we will be supporting that in this upcoming legislative session. However, 11.7 is about half of 25 million, right? And if your memory serves you well, you'll recall that 25 million was actually half of the 50 million that was indicated by the actual cost and actual time study. So we are not being made whole by this $11.7 million. This is a Band-Aid at best. And you can be darn sure we're going to be going back to the state and making the case that we need to have much more intense and focused conversations around the how, the why, and where these dollars are deployed. So that's what we're going to be working on. We're going to be working on that in concert with AOC. This is a priority for their Public Safety Steering Committee. We're going to be working on this with our fellow county partners. And we have support from the DAs and the Sheriff's Association. So I think it's going to be an all hands on deck effort. In terms of the actual reductions, it's very difficult because one of the questions I would ask as a commissioner is, well, Jagjeet, what's it going to look like if we don't get this $11.7 million pop for 21? I can't give you a specific answer. What I can give you are the functional areas of services that could be impacted, because there'll have to be a number of hard decisions to be made, both at the director level, the staff level, then of course at the board level and county administrator level, to finalize what would have to be cut. But let me give you a little sneak peek. In terms of service reductions and possible FTEs, we're looking at possibly reducing our housing service subsidies for homeless folks who are justice involved. Given the fact that we have a housing crisis, doesn't seem like good policy. We could be cutting our domestic violence housing subsidy for folks who are dealing with domestic violence. Probably not a good policy to support. We could also pull away money from community corrections that supports jail beds. Currently, 26% of the community corrections budget supports jail beds. But then the question is, where is that money going to come from? If we reduce FTEs, caseloads are going to be higher for those probation and parole officers who already have high caseloads. If we want to have a system of justice that sort of comports with best practices, reducing those caseloads would be better, right? And so the way to think about this is that, without proper intervention, it's fair to assume that there would be both an increase in recidivism, because that's one of the strong suits of community corrections. People get addiction services, mental health treatment. They're fostered in their community, not a prison cell, to rehabilitate and to eviscerate recidivism, right? But if you start to pull that sort of finely balanced machine apart, you're likely going to see both an increase in recidivism and thereby an increase in criminal activity. So there's the why. I've already talked a bit about the how. Glad to take any questions if you'd like, so I'll take a pause on community corrections. Not seeing any, you're all very tiny. I'm going to move on. Juvenile conciliation. As a reminder, what is juvenile conciliation? Juvenile conciliation provides state-mandated mediation services to assist people considering divorce reaching an agreement about custody and parenting based on the best interest of the child prior to a court hearing, right? In about the 80s, this is when the state sort of let go of this and gave it to the counties to be able to do this service. And part of the rationale, if you look at sort of the legislative history behind this, is that it was also done, one, to serve better interests of children, but also to reduce the burden on the court system at the time. So that gives you an idea of what the conciliation services is. Now, funny story here. There was a statewide reduction in one of the special sessions by the budget adjustment bill that cut county law library services statewide by $925,000. There is an Oregon revised statute that allows local governments to use whatever percentage they deem appropriate based on a vote at the local level by their board. You can use the law library appropriation for juvenile mediation services, conciliation services. So back in about 2011 or thereabouts, the Washington County Board of Commissioners made the decision to direct 60% of law library funds to conciliation services. So when the state made the budget adjustment this past special session during 2020, one of the 3 special sessions we've had thus far, this had sort of this double impact on us, right? And I've said this time and time again. And so what does it look like for juvenile conciliation if assuming we don't get any more money? Well, it's a pretty dire situation. We're talking about the loss of 0.8 FTE, which is actually currently vacant, but we really do sort of need to fill that position so that we can get adequate staffing. It'll also impact conciliation staff to do voluntary mediations. This means individuals not who are court ordered or court mandated to do conciliation, but wanting to find an agreement together rather than having the court do it. As you can imagine, that comports with what's sort of best for the child, right? It'll also increase the number of contested custody agreements in court, increasing the docket and slowing down the process. As you've all heard, commissioners, we have a burgeoning docket. I mean, we're talking about opening up large stadiums to be able to push through and get through our workload. This would only add to that. And also due to the fact that the funding has been static for so long, it'll fundamentally just amount to a further erosion of services over time, right? And so this is much like community corrections, where I can't pinpoint exactly what the impact is going to be, but this is sort of the menu of bad things that could happen if we don't get this money. In terms of the how, it's interesting because with Law Library, there's a work group that's been organized by Senator Floyd Przansky. And Rob Bovet and Alex Kyler and myself have successfully been able to sort of shift the conversation to also include conciliation. And I think that's going to be a great starting point for us to talk about the budgetary issues, but this could also manifest itself in an actual piece of legislation that we advance. It might be something where we work to lift the local preemption on adding local fees. And the way I'd like to approach this possibly is making it an opt-in, where if the state doesn't provide a certain level of adequate funding for a local government, then they have the choice to opt in to add a local fee. Now, these ideas are much in their formation states because we want to work with the coalition. We want to work with our county partners. We want to work with AOC so we have a loud voice on this. But both for the law library and for conciliation, it's really going to come down to, I think, again, multi community corrections and all hands on deck effort and really making the case as to why both of these services are so important. Chair Harrington?
Could you repeat who the they was in deciding that they would allow for opt-in, or that they would opt in rather?
The they would be local governments. So currently there's a preemption on adding fees to law libraries and conciliation services, right? Because
we're the they.
Correct. We are the they and other local governments. I see this as a decent approach rather than just asking for an appropriation, because as you can imagine, there are going to be a number of compelling asks this legislative session, ranging from higher education to wildfire to COVID relief, you name it. And so I wanted to be a little bit more nimble in how we approach this. But again, all hands on deck, and we should be able to get this across the goalpost as well. Focusing for a moment on the law library, what will those impacts look like, right? We had a great constituent earlier today talk about the importance of our county law library, so I won't ring that bell again. But what this will mean, again, possible reduction of FTEs of the law library, a reduction in hours of service, a reduction in costly legal search engines. Commissioner Scouten, you alluded to this. Today's legal world is primarily conducted through legal search engines, whether you're using Lexis, Westlaw, Bloomberg's pretty good too. We have subscriptions to Westlaw and Lexis, and they are quite costly. And a lot of practitioners, myself as a recovering lawyer, can tell you how fantastic it is to be able to access those services at your county law library. The law library, however, compared to conciliation, is in a little bit better shape from the county's purview because there's a bit of a fund balance that should be able to carry over until fiscal year 2023. But we really need to have these conversations happening now at the state legislature so that we don't find ourselves in a bind or an unsavory predicament come 2023. And I also want to just note that both law library and conciliation staff and directors will be coming to you for a deeper dive at an upcoming work session. So with that, I will take any questions.
Commissioner Trees or Commissioner Rogers, do you have any questions? Okay, Commissioner Scouten and Willie? No? Okay, let's keep going. Thank you. You're doing a good job.
At this point.
Okay.
Great,
thank you.
next
Got the
slide.
first part of it anyway. I did what I could.
Yep.
Thank you. Erin, you're up. Workforce development.
So, like a number of our other priorities, these are carryovers from 2020 in many ways, but again, it's a new question of a new budget year. Workforce development is, I see it as a huge part of the economic development work that the county is going to have to do in order to be prepared to come out of COVID as we face a new overall landscape of what jobs are available and how work is done. And workforce development programs are key to making sure that our workforce is ready and able to do the jobs that are available within Washington County. So I've started talking with Worksession Inc. to find out what their goals are for the 2021 to 23 biennium budget. And one of the things that was noticeable to me in that conversation is that as COVID continues to have an impact on our institutes of higher education, it puts a squeeze on the budget because for workforce development, because the workforce development programs are pretty much funded out of the higher education budget request, which means that as our community colleges and our universities are looking for new funding because of slowdowns in the number of people who are enrolling, because of how classes are now being done, it puts further pressure on the workforce development budgets to kind of make sure that their voices are heard. And I think so by having Washington County come to the table and recognizing the important services that Worksession Inc. provides to our region, it helps amplify and push forward that these dollars that are brought into the state to these programs has a long-term huge benefit to the state as a whole, but also to the members of our community. Right now, in particular, there are 3 proposed budget policy option packages, or POPs, that have a total of about $27 to $28 million that would go towards a statewide workforce development programs. Those 3 POPs focus on 3 different types of activities. One is youth employment opportunities and training. The next is grants for local boards to do locally tailored industry development by working with employers and the workforce that comes to them to make sure that their programs are tailored to the types of jobs that aren't seeing enough people who are qualified to do the work, and to bring people into those better paying, more stable jobs. And then finally, adult learners for the programs that assist folks who maybe didn't complete their high school diploma, and that is the next step that they need to take in their journey in order to find that more stable workforce.
Erin, could I ask you a quick question on this proposed legislation? Is there an allocation process tied to that? And the reason I'm asking that question is that we've seen dips in the allocation of Worksession's of workforce dollars to our region over the past few years. I want to make sure that we're aware of what a potential allocation process looks like as well.
Commissioner Trees, I'll have to follow up with you specifically on some of those details. I don't have them yet because they're still being drafted by the workforce development strategic thinkers. And I think it'll vary by the POP. So for the youth services, there might be a different allocation methodology, but all of them do focus on making sure that programs that are focused on reaching communities of color, rural communities, generational poverty, and or communities that are historically underrepresented take priority. So given that Work Systems Inc. has a major step up in having been very specifically looking at how they can make those services available to those communities, I think that might put them towards the top, but I don't have the specifics on each one of the different POPs that they're seeking. But I will also be mindful as we move forward that for the basic funding for workforce development programs that comes from the state and just is the general basis, not the additional monies in the POPs that's being sought, that regional consideration better reflects the number of job opportunities and the population size within our region that Work Systems Inc. provides for.
And if I can jump in, Commissioner Treese, I think that you're also thinking about the funding formula that got shifted a couple of years back that we've been fighting with the governor's office about. And that problem remains and will be sort of a constant issue. That's not yet been resolved. So I think.
And I understand that, but I just want to make sure that we're looking ahead, that we don't have those types of situations pop up again.
Yep. Well, and I think it's not unpopped yet. I think we're still fighting that battle, but I think Erin will do a good job of navigating those waters. Yeah.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
And as to the how, Washington County has started to develop that relationship with Work Systems Inc. and then also the lobbyists who work for the workforce development programs and boards across the state, so that we can be a better partner and really push that with our delegation within Washington County and through our caucus to really show how the investments here are long-term solutions to some of the problems that we've seen exacerbated by COVID, but pre-exist COVID. We can't pretend like COVID was the first time we've ever heard of disparities in income and how folks with lower educational levels or fewer opportunities to get into workplaces doesn't somehow have long-term consequences for them. So we'll be working with those partners and other folks who want to come to the table to work with Work Systems Inc. and their compatriots and making sure that there is sufficient funding, particularly for our region, but also for these very important programs that serve communities that are often least served. Happy to answer any questions or wait till our question slide at the end.
Great. And so next we've got housing and homelessness with Paige.
Great, thanks. So
next slide. Oh, you're there. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. So this is the final priority on the state agenda. And then as Erin just mentioned, the next slide will be an opportunity for questions on this topic or any others that you've heard so far. So your priority proposal for the Housing Services Department for 2021 at the state level is securing funding that supports our houseless populations, our renters, and our homeowners. And why is this a priority? So within the housing services work in my portfolio, really these are the three groups of Washington County residents that we aim to serve: renters, homeowners, and folks who, for a variety of social determinants of health, to use Marnie's term earlier, from earlier today, do not have a safe and stable place to call home. And we know that during the pandemic, keeping folks living where they are, even if it's in a camp, prevents the disease from spreading. So this really is a budgetary, a community, a housing, and a public health issue. As you'll recall, the state has passed measures in 2020 to keep people stably housed to the extent possible during COVID. The state has passed eviction and foreclosure moratoriums this year, accompanied by rent assistance dollars to keep landlords whole. And I will set aside the federal eviction moratorium because Oregon's is more protective and also more flexible and accompanied by those rent assistance dollars. But it is worth noting that there is both the federal and the state moratorium on evictions in place through the end of 2020. But both will sunset on December 31st if not renewed. So what the 2021 legislative work boils down to under this priority is really three things. For tenants, eviction moratorium extension and/or enough rent assistance dollars to keep tenants housed and landlords able to pay those mortgages. For homeowners, preventing their foreclosures through the foreclosure moratorium extension and/or mortgage assistance dollars. And for our neighbors experiencing homelessness, this is both capital construction dollars for shelters, as well as services, funding for prevention and outreach and operating our safe sleep village or other temporary sheltering space, and isolation or quarantine for those experiencing houselessness who are also symptomatic or have a diagnosis for COVID. So again, these are the same efforts that we'll aim to have in place for as long as the pandemic and the associated unemployment rates endure: rent assistance, mortgage assistance, eviction and foreclosure moratorium, and then capital dollars and operational dollars for our homeless services. And I know that we will have a lot of folks with us to be able to try to move these important priorities forward in 2021. We are certainly not alone in including housing protections in our legislative agenda for 2021. These issues remain a top priority for the Speaker's Office, for other counties, for AOC, and for two associations that we belong to, the Housing Alliance of Oregon and the Housing Authorities of Oregon, both who also have excellent lobby representation. And so this priority will be shared by many, and we will work to secure needed funding and the local control and flexibility for the funding and for the programs. And with that, I think it's time for the questions slide.
Yeah, next slide. And also, Administrator Angie, can I get a time check? I don't recall if we had 45 or 60 minutes, and I want to 60. Okay, so I just want us to stay on time. So questions for any of the state legislative priorities?
Commissioner Rogers, do you have any questions?
No, I just appreciate it. It's a very thorough report. Thank you.
Commissioner Willie?
No, I know that's a very good recap, and I appreciate all of that. There's a couple of areas, though, that I probably should talk to. I'm thinking, Aaron, of the things that I'm in the mainstream of, and I've said this to the commission before. It's in regards to trails money and about rural broadband money, and so both of those I just want to not necessarily make it certainly a legislative priority, but I certainly want it to, if there's any chatter that's going on, any money that's available, whatever the case is, I'd just like to be made aware of it.
Okay.
I have noted that, Commissioner Willie, and I will make sure that you stay in the loop. And as other bills come forward and other proposals come forward, we'll make sure that you have the information that you need. It is a question for the board if they want to raise any of those issues to the level of a priority to add, like if you wanted to add rural broadband in infrastructure development, that could be done here in the federal. That's also one that we've started talking with Van Scoyoc at the federal level, but that is perhaps the place where, as we've developed these priorities, we've gone to our departments and our partners and
If I could
Please,
interrupt
go ahead, sorry.
process-wise, this is why we had the team in a couple of weeks ago on the draft agenda, and so the time for inclusion was between then and now. Okay? So just trying to watch the clock because we still have the federal agenda to go through. So Commissioner Willie mentioned that he'll follow up with you offline and proceed so that as potential bills come up through the legislature, that he can be involved with that.
Great. Okay, thank you. So next, that's the slide. Yes, thank you. So just a quick reminder, as a result of how the Washington County guiding principles are currently written, they are a mix of sort of longer-term high-level statements with some of these.
And for clean water services, are we doing that after the federal
Yes.
agenda?
Yes.
Okay, 20 minutes.
So they are a mix of longer-term high-level statements with some of these shorter-term legislative priorities. So we've recommended just the adoption of some language into your guiding principles until you have a chance to do some strategic planning with the county administrator. Next slide. Thank you. I'm just going to very high level here remind you that there are priorities around COVID, recovery and relief, international trade, and health and human services. We'll do the deeper dive on the next slide. So let me just take just a moment to talk to you about COVID, recovery, and relief. While the dollars that have driven our local response dry up on December 30th of this year, we know well that the novel coronavirus will be with us well into 2021. Here's a quick overview on what we know, what we don't know, and what we're working on. So what we know is in order to keep our community safe, we are going to need another round of investment in our public health system. We also know that the odds of another round of federal stimulus happening before the end of the year are slim to none. What we don't know yet is the size of our funding gap between what we have and what we need. That's in process, I know, with Administrator Angie and Marnie Kyle, and they will be coming to you with some more details on what that looks like. What we also know is we don't know yet what's going to happen with the federal election, both in terms of the presidential election and what's going to happen in the Senate. So in the coming weeks, we'll have a better look into that. What we have been doing is we've been in regular contact with our federal team at Van Scoyoc. They have been keeping their fingers on the pulse of what's happening at NACO, as well as other federal organizations that have been involved in this kind of lobbying. We're in regular contact with our federal delegation, and we already are in the process of building out a longer-term strategy that will include everything from direct lobbying to a public affairs effort in the media, if that's the desire of the board, to ensure that both our federal delegation and our governor understand the need for these dollars in order to fulfill our mission as a public health agency. I don't think any surprises here, but this will continue to be a priority both at federal and state level. Next slide, please. Erin Doyle, you're up.
Just to ground us in where this priority came from, when we did that consolidation of the federal agenda that Elizabeth referred to, we looked at what statements that were called principles existed and compared them to the projects and or legislative requests that were in there. And the thing that clearly dropped off was a statement related to international trade. There had been a priority in the 2020 and 2019 federal legislative agenda related to the NAFTA renewal. Didn't seem timely to continue that forward anymore. So we wanted to make a generalized statement that recognizes how important international trade is for most of the industries that come out of Washington County, from agricultural to technology to medical. So this is a generalized statement that gives Van Scoyoc and the opportunity to partner with NACO if some further future trade agreements come forward, to kind of continue to have the perspective that Washington County is supportive of trade agreements that allow our US, Oregon, and Washington County businesses have the ability to access and robustly participate in international trade markets, so that we can continue to see the growth that's needed as we move forward, and wanting to make sure that the United States Senate and US Congress have recognition that Washington County is supportive of those things that make it easier for us to access those markets, whatever type of international trade agreement they might be, and check back in with us if there are particulars related to any of the trade agreements that might be coming forward. Again, without knowing what those are, based on not knowing what election results are, it's left that broadly, but it is in support of our economic development overall strength that we have as Washington County.
Great, thank you, Erin. Next slide. Page in Health and Human Services.
Great, thank you, Elizabeth. So you'll see at the top of the screen the proposed new guiding principle, and then I'll cover the 3 bullet points underneath that will encompass our priorities that are nested under this guiding principle. So first, continued access to care. This arises from uncertainties around the current national healthcare model that will become clearer following elections and Supreme Court decisions. We will want to ensure continued access to care for those pre-existing health conditions, including those who have had COVID-19. Additionally, prescription drug cost increases are placing a lot of added pressure on the state budget at a time when enrollment in the Oregon Health Plan, or OHP, which is our state's Medicaid program, has increased due to COVID-19. As well, for mental health, we will be seeking adequate Medicaid dollars for Washington County behavioral health services, which are also largely funded through OHP and Medicaid reimbursement. And then I'm sorry, that was the 3rd bullet, so I skipped down and covered that. And then the 3rd bullet, which appears as number 2, fully funding WIC. I know that Washington County WIC provides amazing services to women with young families and men with young families as well, including nutrition education, healthy food, health referrals, breastfeeding support, and other services totally free of charge to any Washington County family who qualifies. WIC's goal is to keep pregnant and breastfeeding women and children and their families under age 5 healthy. This one is likely to always be a priority. And I want to thank Chair Harrington and Commissioner Treese for your continued support of WIC. It was a pleasure to meet with Congresswoman Bonamici and continue garnering her support for our programs, as she's such a WIC advocate, and it was great having her for our offices earlier this year. And then finally, while not included on your slide, I want you to know that your government relations team, along with Dan Skoyak, our associates based in DC, are prepared to seek any funding for HHS funding gaps that are likely to arise around continued need for providing isolation, quarantine, contact tracing, and case investigations for COVID-19.
Thank you. Next slide, and Jajit.
Thank you. Chair Harrington, Commissioners, I'll be very brief for the sake of time. Federally, when it comes to public safety, we want to look for all of the opportunities that we had supported in the past when it comes to the federal appropriations process, right? These are the JAG burn grants, the COPS, COPS, that stands for Community Oriented Policing Services. We want to look for new dollars that also allow us to perhaps be more progressive in our policing output. I think that depending on the way that our presidential election goes, and also if the Senate flips, that's a key part of this, we may see a lot more progressive dollars for policing and perhaps more community policing, more trauma-informed policing, more equity-based policing. And we want to support those because I think that's exactly what we heard from our community. Public safety also encompasses emergency services federally, right? And so we rely on FEMA when there's a disaster. The two fires that we had in the county really showed how well our emergency services work and how well our staff does at dealing with those emergencies. And so we want to ensure that all of our funding streams that we rely on federally are robust and do not get diminished regardless of what administration we're dealing with. And finally, something I've been sort of keeping in the back of my mind, we need a new courthouse, right? And I've actually heard more murmurs that there may be some level of federal support for either rehabbing or reconstructing crumbling and seismically insecure courthouses. And so this is something we'll also be pursuing. We want to leave this as broad as possible so that both our local government relations team and our federal lobbyist, Fan Skoyak, can engage as many opportunities that are beneficial to the county as possible. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Oh, of course.
Absolutely.
Jagjit, I hadn't thought about this after our last meeting, but the call with Governor Brown this morning reiterated that she's committed to move forward with the Racial Justice Advisory Committee recommendations. And so it is wonderful that you're positioned both at the state level for public safety as well as covering this side on the federal. I don't know to what degree you and our regional legislative affairs folks are talking about how we might leverage the work done or the advice through that council to the state legislature and the feds, not only through 2021 but beyond, but we sure could use the help.
You've nailed it. That's exactly right. I mean, I hope to be able to use whatever valuable substance comes from that particular work group to help us both at the state level and federally.
Okay.
You're exactly right.
Thank you.
Next slide, and questions on the federal agenda.
Commissioner Rogers or Commissioner Treese? Commissioner
Nope.
Willie? Nope.
Great.
All
Thank you for-
set.
Thank you for your patience as we move through
presentations
it.
are both very explanatory and provide many good examples too. So it's a little hard to have it all done virtually.
Yes.
I so wish you were in the room today, but you've been doing a stellar job.
Thank you. And now I see Mark Jockers has joined us, and we have Aaron Doyle ready to go to provide you the state and federal agenda, proposed agenda for clean water services.
I'm going to let Mark say what he would like to say first, and then I'll walk us through the state and then the federal agenda adjustments.
Thank you, Aaron. I was going to say I'm going to let Aaron speak first. And then
Well, you
go
don't
back and
want
forth.
me speaking.
So I just wanted to acknowledge the work Aaron and I have been, Aaron's been very helpful in terms of putting this together. This is our state and federal agenda that we've assembled based on clean water services priorities. You'll be pretty familiar with it. Certainly on the state level, it really focuses a great deal on Oregon DEQ and their budget. together with the one bill that is moving forward as a collaborative effort has to do with disposable wipes, which we've talked about previously. And then the federal, our priorities continue to be Scoggins Dam, Hague Lake, our work with the Bureau of Reclamation, and then the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Swapito site. We also have been looking a little bit at what COVID assistance may look like on both a state or federal level. The HEROES Act, which passed through the House on the federal level, did include low-income ratepayer assistance for water and sewer, which is very, very important to us. That hasn't moved anywhere else. Also an acknowledgement that special service districts such as Washington County, such as Clean Water Services, are eligible for some of this COVID federal money if that moves forward. So that's roughly, broadly speaking, where it is. And I'm going to hand it over to Aaron, who's very good at running through this quickly.
I will do my best to be fast with our remaining time. So not a lot has actually changed in the substance of what we're looking at on either the state or federal agenda for clean water services. But what I've done within the new draft agendas that have been provided to you is kind of consolidate them in form to look more closely aligned with Washington County's presentation of what their agendas are. And sort of consolidated some of the concepts into broader statements of what those concepts are. As Mark and I have talked through this, a lot of this has also come with partnerships that Clean Water Services already engages in with the Special Districts Association and the Association of Clean Water Service Providers, or that I added a letter in there, but AQUA. And we'll be working with them very closely to ensure that Clean Water Services continues to be part of that conversation and used strategically within the examination of the DEQ budget. But mostly the focus on for the state agenda is on the long-term resilience and efficiency in providing services that Clean Water Services provide. And resilience not just in the physical infrastructure and making sure that it is capable of continuing to clean what gets put down it, but also from a financial perspective as well. Between the DEQ budget, making sure that it's well balanced to ensure that we as permit holders and permit fee payers are not bearing the brunt of DEQ's work, which then trickles down to our ratepayers. But making sure that the state is also putting in the appropriate funding for that. But then also looking at the long-term ability for the state to do management so that we can do management of our resources over the long term. In addition, at the state level, we're really focusing on those things that Clean Water Services has done to make sure that we can run an efficient program that reuses the resources that we have, that allows us to take advantage of programs that invest in the type of work that Clean Water Services does, not just to meet regulatory requirements, but also then to get credits for the work that they're doing related to resource management, not just of the water, but the lands that help protect the water. As we move forward in the 2021 session, we will continue to work with our fellow water service providers in making sure that our state agenda really is a cohesive set of strategies. And I will be working with their folks in the Capitol building, already starting those conversations. Right now, in particular, looking at the system development charges, both from the perspective of Washington County and Clean Water Services, to make sure that we continue to be resilient to new development, as Washington County is not likely to slow down in its level of development. Next slide, please. On the federal level, or in the federal agenda, this looks very different than what was presented to you a couple of weeks ago. And this was to just kind of take all of that text and put it and distill it into some large, broad concepts. Unlike the county, there are really some easily identified principles versus priorities in the federal Clean Water Services agenda. So the guiding principles are there to basically show that Clean Water Services wants to see a continuing investment in water infrastructure. That should be surprising to no people at the table, but all the different various pots of money that are available at the federal level need to continue to see that level of support, and any new funding sources need to consider what the needs of local government are to successfully develop and maintain our infrastructure. So that's where the guiding principles are focused that are there on draft page 5. And then there are 2 legislative priorities listed under that, but as Mark mentioned, we had just started having a conversation about what a 3rd legislative priority should be, and that you'll see that here on this slide. So Scoggin Dam, you guys know those details. It's a vitally important project, and we are partnering with the federal government to make sure that we have a safe, long-term solution to making sure that our water can be properly stored and safely stored. Wapato investments are vital to our ongoing meeting of regulatory requirements and making sure that our water resources stay clean and and also naturally working with the system that Clean Water Services has. But finally, looking to add, and we just didn't have time to get it into the agenda in order to get it into the packet based on timing of Mark and I's work, but creating something that is very specific to COVID response and Clean Water Services, as opposed to just walking under the umbrella of the Washington County COVID response, but create a specific priority for ratepayers rate relief, either through monies that can be then used to pay for utility bills for water and wastewater services, and possibly direct disbursements to special districts like Clean Water Services. And that language will be included in the final agenda unless there's an objection from the board. And with that, I am happy to answer any questions related to Clean Water Services agenda, or Mark is also available as well.
Next slide.
Commissioner Treese and Willie?
No.
Commissioner Rogers?
Just one question, Aaron. We've been at this dam project for a long time. And do you see any headway? I mean, I know we're slipping further and further back in terms of other projects from around the country competing. So and maybe this is just too much for this agenda and we're late in the day, but maybe Diane or somebody could update us at some point, just very briefly, on what's going on.
I'll work with Mark to make sure that that briefing happens.
Thank you.
Great, next slide, thank you. So here we are, so November 3rd through 17th, opportunity for input, direction, however you want to take it from here, board. Our plan is, barring any changes, that we'll come back to you on the 17th at the board meeting to provide a final presentation with Clean Water Services and our federal lobbyists. We'll be doing it on camera, so there'll be some stuff that you've heard before, but we're going to try to keep it short and sweet now that we've had this deep dive. I want to thank you for your patience. I know it was a lot of information, but we wanted to make sure you had some grounding in why we were putting forward what we're putting forward and what the goals were for each of those.
Thank you, team. Thank you, board members. We spent time deeply on this on October 20th as well as today and our time in between. So we look forward to having the opportunity to adopt both of these agendas on November 17th.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good job, team.
Great to see everyone. Goodbye. Have a good afternoon.
Okay, we still have 4 major agenda items for today, and we find ourselves at 3 o'clock. So we'll move onward to the introduction to limited English assistance policy and procedure. Oh, yay, an in-person presentation.
She's real. She's here.
It's not Memorex. It did help me end my headache when Michael helped turn the volume down a little bit too. So
Okay.
that was helpful.
We're doing this as a team, so you'll hear from more than just one person.
Well, great.
As well.
We have good room to spread out.
We do. It's wonderful. So good afternoon, Chair Harrington and Commissioners. I'm Latricia Tillman. I'm the Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer. And today we're bringing forward the limited English assistance policy for your consideration. But before we jump in, I want to set the context for this work and for the near-term focus for the Office of Equity, Inclusion, and Community Engagement. Can we get the next slide, please? So nearly 60 years ago, the Civil Rights Act was signed into law, and it includes multiple provisions, including Title II, which is focused on public accommodations, Title VI, which focuses on client civil rights, Title VII, which focuses on equal employment opportunity and affirmative action, which you'll hear more about on Thursday, and Title VIII, which focuses on fair housing. The Voting Rights Act was also signed into law in 1965, and in 1990, the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed, and it aligns very closely with the Civil Rights Act. So this is the foundation for equity, diversity, and inclusion work, and it will be one critical body of work for us at the county. At the federal level, civil rights laws begin to dismantle the structures that have been established to create and perpetuate inequity, segregation, and exclusion based on race and other factors for generations. So we are aligning LEAP with federal guidance tied to Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. And this attention to alignment will be consistent as we progress towards full implementation of other elements of civil rights laws. So let's see. Specific to the limited English assistance policy, Title VI prohibits exclusion from participation in, denial of benefits of, or discrimination based on protected class for any federal program or activity receiving federal funding. So obviously, as a county, we receive federal funding. So Title VI applies to everything that we do.
So it's my understanding that applies to everything we do, not just those things that are funded through federal dollars.
Everything that we do, and then when other organizations that we fund receive $1 of federal funding, it applies to everything they do. So this is, huge structural dismantling in order to move us towards equity and inclusion.
Yeah, that was a big learning for me when I was at Metro as well.
Yes.
Permeates everything.
And that's why we wanted to set the context, because we could just dive into the policy and not realize that there's this huge structure that supports this work moving forward. The Supreme Court decision in 1972, Lau versus Nichols, established the legal connection between language access and civil rights protections based on national origins. And 28 years later, in 2000, federal guidance through an executive order supported full implementation of language access through various federal agencies for recipients of federal funding. And then here we are now, 20 years after that, looking at how do we use that federal guidance to align the work. So next slide, please. So I've heard other folks say, and I'm going to echo it here, equity work is everyone's responsibility. And so we are engaging you as the board in your policy role around this important equity issue. And implementation will require work at every level of the organization. And we'll be working in close partnership with departments to support implementation alongside the Office of Equity, Inclusion, and Community Engagement. And we'll share more about what that's going to look like shortly. But at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Philip and Amanda to provide more detail on the policy that we're asking you to consider today.
Thanks, Latricia. Philip Bransford with the County Administrative Office. And what we're looking at here is what compliance looks like. I have to say, we're going to walk through what the federal government, as Latricia mentioned, in the 2000s and I think in the 1990s, there was some promulgation of some regulation as well that we've sifted through to try to answer that question. But I have to point out that we had a 20-person internal work group spend a couple years sifting through this as well. They have an aspirational idea of what compliance looks like, and I think it's fair to say it exceeds what we're going to describe here as the floor of what the federal regulations require. So the federal regulations talk about a 4-factor test. The first being the prevalence, not of language spoken in the community. We know that there are hundreds of languages. It's the prevalence of a barrier to accessing the county's services. a language barrier in particular. And if there is a preferred language that would remove the barrier, if we're engaging strictly in English and yet there's a preferred language that we should be paying attention to, then what are those languages? That's where we'll talk in a second about what a safe harbor language might be. That's the first factor. The second factor is also a way of trying to get at prevalence, but this time it's how often are we encountering somebody who's experiencing a language barrier and not accessing our services because of that. So over our countertops, over the phone, out in the field, you know, when the restaurant inspection worker is on the ground, how often is there a barrier there because of English language being the way that we're trying to reach out or trying to provide the service? That's number two. The third factor has to do with the nature and importance of the program, what we're trying to accomplish as an organization, the service that we're providing. And there's an understanding there that not everything that we're doing necessarily is, rises to a high level of importance. So not everything needs to be translated or interpreted. An example might be, you might have a grant program, you might have a technical manual about how to operate the grant program. That's not what the member of the community needs to have translated word for word. It's the application so that they can access the grant. If there's a language barrier there, then the organization needs to address that, and the federal government gives a name for that sort of thing. It's called a vital document. So we can talk more about that as needed here. And then the final one is, of course, we don't have infinite resources. So the federal regulations speak to resource constraints and the availability of resources. Latricia did an analysis as we were preparing here. I think we spent about $500,000 last fiscal year on translation and interpretation services across the entire organization. You can expect that number to grow, I imagine, as we get our footing here about not only complying but maybe exceeding compliance here in this federal area. So that's the groundwork. I'll just go one more slide here and speak to that notion of safe harbor language. So again, there's not it's not about how many languages are out there. It's where the language barrier is, and then what are the languages that would be better to use to communicate with folks. The federal government gives us this floor, this threshold. How many people are we talking about? Is it one person? Is it 5? The federal government speaks to, if the population, the community exceeds 5% of a particular geography or more than 1,000 individuals, whichever is the fewer, above that, you need to focus on the languages. What are the languages that would work? And then you get a kind of constellation of those that are called safe harbor languages. And the federal government calls it a safe harbor because if there's good effort going on by the organization, by the recipient of the federal funds, like Latricia was saying, to remove the language barriers for those language cohorts, that's evidence of strong evidence of compliance is the wording in the federal regulations.
Oh, there we go. Amanda Garcia Snell, Community Engagement Manager. So as Philip mentioned, the policy is really our first formal beginning. So folks across the county have been providing some type of language services in different ways, in different program aspects, but we really haven't formalized that effort, and so this is the opportunity to do that. We, in addition, the work group that Philip mentioned, those folks have been working on this for quite some time, and so this is really our beginning of our beginning. So of course, the purpose of the policy is to define this work and to really ensure the meaningful access to services. And then it has a variety of elements that will then further be described in the procedure. But clarify vital documents, really ensure that people needing the language access are getting what they need to be able to thrive in the county. Next slide. Thanks. So one of the policy implications, as Philip mentioned, the safe harbor languages. And so here's our current list of safe harbor languages for the county as a whole geographic region. Of course, if you drill down into different areas of the county, this list could look different. But across the whole county, this is our current list that we're working with. And we looked to census data because there is a numerical definition of a safe harbor language. But then we also, census data is wonderful. It's what we have, but it's not perfect. And so we really wanted to do a more comprehensive picture of what types of languages we would really want to be thinking about providing vital documents in. So we also looked to Metro, which has done an extensive process around this work. And then we also looked to the work group and to folks across the county, our staff, for anecdotal and service provision experience. And so one example of how this list has morphed out of those conversations, for the census data, we did a 3-year look back, and in some of those years, Somali does not rise to the threshold level that we would need in order to include it in a safe harbor language. But speaking with our staff, especially in public health, we're very aware that we have Somali community that receives services at the county. And so we added Somali to the list. That's one example. Sure.
Can I ask a question on this? So if you go back one slide, one more, and what we're talking about here is the criteria that I'm not seeing it now, the 5% criteria?
Oh, back one more.
One more slide.
Yeah, and so that's what we're talking about as far as you referred to, vital documents and languages that we need to be paying attention to. So then if we go back forward to the listing of all the languages, all of those languages meet that criteria with the exception of Somali that you talked about?
No, so that's what I was describing, because the census data for the threshold, when we get into the smaller communities, sometimes the margin of error in the census data is greater than the number of the population. And so it's not particularly reliable. And so that's why we really tried to take a more comprehensive approach. So this is not the bare minimum of what we would offer based on the threshold. It's a minimum plus. So we've looked at the census.
Minimum what?
The minimum plus.
Okay, that's
We've looked at census data, then we've looked at Metro because it's really taken a regional approach to looking at the data. And then we also included in that conversation the feedback of the work group and staff around what types of languages they were needing to provide language access services.
Madam Chair, may I just add a little bit to one of the things that we know about the languages is that given changes in population over time, the languages will also change, the language need will also change. And then as we mentioned before, departments need to look at the populations they serve and programs need to look at the populations they serve. So that's why we titled this Potential Countywide Safe Harbor Languages, because like a WIC program may have a very different demographic and language need in their population than like assessment and taxation. And so that we do expect that there will be variation in the required languages program by program and department by department.
I see, okay, all right.
Additional clarification here is that the safe harbor language is for translation and where we proactively translate written documents. Even if there's one person who speaks one language in a program and they need interpretation services, they have a right through Title VI to interpretation in their language. There's no safe harbor for interpretation.
It doesn't have to be printed material. Though.
Right,
We can just
exactly.
provide an interpreter to.
Safe harbor is really the threshold for proactive translation of written documents.
Okay.
Back one. Yeah. So in addition to the policy that we're asking you to consider, we're also asking you to consider the procedure, which is includes a variety of attachments, but essentially the procedure is about helping us implement some of the, and define some of the components of the policy. So within the procedure, there's translation and interpretation guidance, similar to what Latricia just described. We have some visual documents to help staff sort of demystify some of that determination on what needs to be translated or interpreted and when and to what degree. We've also in the procedure clarified some of the vital documents because the phrase vital documents means all kinds of things to people, and there is some guidance around the definition of that, but we really need to think about it more in terms of our county organization. And then we have a language preference card, which you'll see, a language preference card, which you will not see, but you can see later, is in development, and it's really what we're calling an I Speak card. And so it's a card that we can hand out to our community partners for them to share with their service populations, but then also we can hand them out to community members. And it just says, I speak, whatever language somebody speaks. It references the Title VI, and then folks have an opportunity when you can hand that to whoever you're interacting with. And so it's very clear right away what type of language service they might need.
And one thing that I appreciated pre-COVID, back in the days of actual in-person open houses, as well as seeing at general stores like Fred Meyer, in our name tags, having the addition of I Speak information. I always found that very welcoming.
And then we also have a language selection card, and that you will see in a minute, and Philip can describe that in more detail. And then we'll be adding statements to informing public of language assistance availability to a lot of our notifications and documents and things like that. And then there's also some suggestion around classifications being modified to reflect bilingual skills that are needed. And I know that that work is already in process with HR.
If I might ask you now,
Sure.
Latricia, and Philip, and Amanda, as we have been, particularly this year, just totally embracing virtual events, and you've been using various outreach tools, invitation tools, and so forth, thus far, have you found those tools providing the level of language support? For example, just the simple invitation that you can get out in different languages. I know you've also hired interpretive services, broadcast, for example, in Spanish and so forth. But thus far, have you found those tools satisfying your needs?
Well, I would say satisfying, I don't know. I don't know we're there yet, at least from my perspective, with my experience of my time in the EOC, and then now as we're doing our community engagement efforts in the virtual world. I think we are becoming a lot more familiar with what currently exists, but I think there's always more for us to learn. I think there are some limitations around simultaneous interpretation and what is available in the virtual world in terms of how many languages you can provide simultaneous interpretation, which is really the most effective way to conduct meetings in multiple languages, because you don't have to stop and wait for someone to interpret information. So I think that's one area where there's still some room for us to grow and to figure out what else is possible. I think in terms of translation, because we're doing so much online, I think, yes, we can provide materials in all kinds of languages, but I don't know that that necessarily gets at the issue of accessibility for folks.
Thank you.
Other things to add.
Okay, so this, I won't go into that much detail because it's supposed to be self-evident. This is a language and selection card that we, as we were going through our work, we identified best practices out there that were low-hanging fruit that we could easily implement without much delay. You just make it happen. And so we did that with these cards and distributed them throughout the organization for countertops as somebody might be coming into the lobby and it's evident that English is not the way to get the information, communicated. So this is basically saying point to the language that you prefer, and then at no obligation, like Latricia was saying, to no charge to you, we will arrange there to get the interpretation for you going, so we can make sure that you are accessing county services. On the back side of this card, facing the staff person, that might be sitting at that desk, is instructions step by step on how to activate the interpretation service that hopefully can resolve the language barrier at that moment. And then next slide, this is just another example. I think I've shown this some weeks ago when we were talking about our outreach for the pandemic. This is another best practice out there with, flaws as they may be. Nonetheless, if you look around, it's just about every public agency has gravitated to Google Translate. And we chose, like with the language card you saw a second ago, well beyond the 11 or so, or I think that's 11 safe harbors to instantly translate the content there on the county webpage as you select up there in the upper right corner. And it's best practice to have it in the footer as well as I look around at other web pages. So that was implemented, I don't know, it's like at least over 2 years ago, I want to say. So there's different steps there we've taken. We just feel like it's the beginning of the beginning, as Amanda mentioned. There's more to do.
So our next steps then are to gather input from you as the board and then return for consideration of the final version of the policy and the procedure. Next slide. And then in terms of implementation, we will be working to create a limited English assistance plan that would include the following elements. So looking at program division or department specific plans, looking at how do we do the 4-factor analysis, which again is about frequency of contact, diversity of languages, cost, and then the consideration of vital documents, which will vary department to department. We'll look at how we need to build out staff training for all staff related to the new policy procedure. And then we'll work with departments to identify translation targets over a 5-year period. So again, it's not looking at how do we come into full compliance translating multiplicity of languages all at once, but really looking at how do we build in that practice over time. And then we'll begin an annual update of our efforts, which will include progress on the limited English accessibility plan. The one thing we didn't mention in here is around how we intend to partner with community-based organizations. Amanda alluded to providing them with I Speak cards. But one of the things that we know we need to build in are quality of translation reviews. So it's one thing to do Google Translate. It's even another thing to hire professional translators to translate your documents. That doesn't necessarily mean the language is accessible to the people that we're trying to serve. So we need to build in that quality process, as well as educating community partners about client civil rights, such as the right to an interpreter free of charge. So those are some of the next steps for implementation for us. So the work is just beginning. So thank you for your time, and we're here to answer any questions you might have.
Just a
Mr. Willie?
quick question on the translation, the interpreter part of it. So does that mean we're also going to have basically a directory of people we can reach out to, excuse me, and provide these services? So it's kind of like we're going to need to have a more complete Rolodex of translators for these. Is that kind of on our responsibility?
Yeah, so we currently have that. The county has a list of contracted language services vendors that county staff can access and use for a variety of their language services needs, interpretation or translation, and that includes American Sign Language as well.
Okay.
And part of the departmental plan will be for departments to look at, based on frequency of contact in certain languages, is it more cost effective to continue to contract with interpreter services or to start hiring more bilingual, bicultural staff? So really thinking through the mechanics of what provides the best level of services and where do we get the best value. Commissioner Rogers?
Yeah, I have a question, but it's of legal, more than the staff presentation. It is always, at least in every business I've been associated with, is always dangerous when you deviate from a safe harbor which is established by federal law. And we're, by our admittance, we're saying, well, we're going to do more. And I'm not making judgment about good, bad, or indifferent, but I think it's exposing us to claims of discrimination when you make exceptions from what is clearly federal law and start making your own laws up personally. So I would like, just personally, since I'm not in the room, I don't see who our legal counsel is there, but or at the moment.
Brad Anderson is here.
Okay, hi, Brad. What long-term exposures do we have, not only today, tomorrow, but in the future for boards to start placing their own terms on what they want to interpret and what they don't want to interpret, and what exposure does the county have as if I happen to be not one of those groups that we have interpretation for, but I have 10 or 15 or 20 or 25 or whatever I have, and numbers of folks who happen to speak whatever language I happen to speak, are we subject then to having made some arbitrary kinds of decisions? And so now we're going to have to extend it. And this could be a very expensive process. So again, I'm not making judgment that it's not a nice thing to do. I just think I need to understand personally what the legal exposure on all of this is.
So Commissioner Rogers, I haven't been directly involved with this project, and so we can certainly get you a response back on that particular question. I know that I've been working with a lot of different state agencies who are now making these requirements as part of their contracts. And we have been trying to do our best to make have some consistent language across state agencies on this requirement. And the safe harbor has come up a whole lot because when you're dealing with 36 counties, the safe harbor language is going to be different in each county. So I don't have an answer for you today on the safe harbor question, but I can tell you that we have been working on this on a variety of fronts. And it's frankly been a surprise for a lot of counties that this is even a requirement. We've known it's been a requirement for a long time. And so fortunately, our staff has been working on it for quite some time. But we will get you a specific answer to your specific question regarding safe harbor language real soon.
Who is the most proficient member of the county council staff on this matter?
I think that Paul Hathaway's been working with Philip's group on this.
Yeah, that's right. Paul Hathaway has helped us. He's reviewed these documents that we're presenting today.
I think while Commissioner Rogers asked the question, I think all of us are interested in the answer as well.
Yeah, we can certainly get you an answer to that. And I understand your concern, Commissioner Rogers, that, if you go beyond the minimum, are you exposing yourself? And like I said, I don't have an answer for you today, but we can get back to you on this.
Commissioner Treese, do you have any questions?
I don't have any questions at this point, but while I appreciate the question that Commissioner Rogers asked, I also want to underscore how important I think it is that we're undertaking this type of movement and that we are addressing the areas where we haven't been up to speed in the past. So I'm just encouraged by the work that's been done. And I know Commissioner Rogers he's not opposed to any of this work. He's looking at this from a protection standpoint, which again, I appreciate, but I just feel so strongly that it's time that we met the needs of our community where they are.
Okay, I have 4 items. 2 of them are related to the actual policy documents. We were provided with policy 207 on Friday, and then on Monday, 207-A. I had read the policy information on Friday and didn't have time to go back and read the version on Monday. And I couldn't find any indication of what the difference was between the A version and the non-A version. Could someone help me with that, please?
The A version is the procedure. 207A is the procedure, and the policy is 207. We did make a few changes to the policy at
Got it.
Tanya's recommendation.
Okay. Okay,
They were not substantive changes, they were minor editorial.
okay. I was trying to follow in the email on Monday what it was pointing me to, and now I get it, because I chose to focus on the policy, not the procedure. I trusted you on the procedure part. Totally. But I wanted to make sure I understood these administrative policies. And towards that end, on the administrative policy, on the first page, in the section authority, which is the second section, the last sentence talks about how the Board of Commissioners has delegated certain responsibilities to the county administrator when adopting the Washington County Title VI Civil Rights Act of 1964 compliance plan per RNO 16-22. That's a long time ago. So that was pre the racial disparity report. So I read that and just wanted to make sure. It could be that that RNO simply does what that sentence says and does the designation. But I figured, well, at this point in time, I at least wanted to make sure that, Tanya, that you and Latricia had the opportunity to look at that. Did you?
Madam
Would you?
Chair, yes, and this is why I wanted to begin this presentation, which is specific to the limited English assistance policy within that broader context of civil rights compliance. And so that is on my list of things to do, which is to look at the Title VI compliance
Okay,
plan policy.
okay.
And make sure that the delegations of authority are appropriate given the current structure today.
Okay, thank
Chair
you.
Harrington, as we continue to review that, there may be additional actions. We're going to be coming back to the board. I will call it, we're peeling back the layers of an onion or an orange, whichever you prefer. And so as we do that, we'll be coming back to you and ensuring that Tricia's office is the keeper, in essence, and steward of this work on behalf of the board and community.
Yeah, and helping the whole organization.
Absolutely.
Okay. I wrote a note. Oh, so right now you have on our website information that if someone is seeking translation services in meetings, whether there are board meetings or I assume committee meetings, that with 24-hour notice you can do that. As we have had more of these virtual meetings, is it still as easily accessible, in your opinion, for people to access that? It's really what I'm trying to get at, is the accessibility to the service. I think you've got the back end to do it already, but it's been quite a year of transition. And so I just wanted to take a breath and ask and make sure, as you've all been running to help us do what's needed, have you been able to get that in place appropriately, or do we need to help in any way?
So that is in place, and we do have a system for that. One of the things that we're doing, because of the nature of how we're communicating with folks and interacting with folks, one of the things that we've been doing with community meetings is just offering them in Spanish, whether or not people are asking for that, but just making that available, because we know that's our largest language group in the county. And we do, at every meeting that we offer that, we have people that use that option.
And Madam Chair, I would just add that there's work to be done for the county administrative office to make sure that we're fully, complying with at least the federal definitions here. And that includes how we're representing the board agenda, the board area of the web page, beyond just relying on Google Translate up there as a widget. So I think you can stay tuned for, more of that kind of content where it's not a full translation. It's just like the language selection card. If you're not able to read this, call this number or what have you, that kind of thing, where we can begin to remove the barrier with a brief phrase, as part of the board packet, as part of the web page. The last thing I would say is, and this is something I've learned a lot from Latricia and Amanda, is this is a kind of you're building the demand, if you will, as you go through time, because the communities we're talking about that have encountered the barrier, or maybe they already just have a predisposition that there is a barrier, so why even try, are communities that I think over time with the equity work that we're talking about will begin over time to see the organization reaching out in this way. And so to say, well, I translated all these things and no one demanded them, or no one asked for the interpretation at my community meeting, even though I offered that and blasted it out on social media, or even used community-based organizations to help me. I think you got to do that over you got to walk your talk for quite a while, and then I think it's a fair moment in time to say, okay, well, how are we doing with that? It looks like we are bridging the gap, or we are removing the barrier. We've opened the channel with some of the communities that heretofore haven't even saw us as a service provider.
Yeah, I feel like I've learned that lesson given the journey that Metro was on over a decade ago. And I do realize it takes time, takes effort, it takes commitment, and I'm all for that. Which the last thing I have is a detail towards that end. In the Metro packets, your interpretation card, they have something like that on, right, an agenda, whether it's one page or multiple pages, and then the last page of the agenda before you get to the rest of the packet is this page that talks about different languages. And I only know English, so I can't tell you what it says and if it delivers on a positive intention. I am not suggesting we do that because, quite frankly, I don't know to what effect it actually serves. So this is an example of where I really need to count on you to help figure out how we're able to better serve the residents of our community, and can use any and all help. Thank you.
I think that's another place where it really would be to our benefit to partner with community-based organizations on this work as well. Get that feedback from folks, speak those languages.
And we can't ask them to do that for free either. It's meaningful work that we need help with. So we have to make these investments in long-term and genuine relationships. So those were my questions. Any last questions of my three other colleagues? Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Appreciate it. Good introduction, which I believe that was your hope for today. Okay, we're at 3:38. Next agenda item is 30 minutes long, and then we'll take a break and figure out our time check and see how we're doing to finish up. Ms. Angie just nodded her head, so she's figuring out the plan. So hello there, Ruth. You're here on an update of supportive housing services and the local implementation plan and proposed timeline for completion. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Chair Harrington, Commissioners. For the record, my name is Ruth Osuna, Deputy County Administrator. I was going to have some people in the audience and on Zoom, but because of the time and folks are at different meetings, I don't know exactly who is on the Zoom from our internal work group.
So pause. Kevin?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Do we have any members from staff who are on Zoom for this topic? Do you know of?
The two that we had that were external had other meetings to attend to. Ruth, is there anyone else I should be looking for that I was not previously made aware of?
I think Comey's on and maybe Annette. Nope.
Yeah, we have Comey, Bibble, and I don't see Annette.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
And what you'll find in my presentation is we have an internal team that is spread out, going to various meetings around the regional program. So the next slide, please. So today, the purpose of today's discussion is to provide the board an update on the supportive housing program, our planning activities and preparation of the local implementation plan, the timeline, and to provide you an opportunity to request additional information. Next slide, please. We're going to request that you consider the following: regional work versus Washington County specific needs. One of the reasons why we have staff not here is that they're working regionally with other counties. And then we're also taking a look at our specific needs based on our current programs. And we're balancing those two. And then we'd like for you to consider the timeline to complete the local implementation plan. We're going to be looking at the current plan, timeline, and then consider perhaps extending the timeline 4 to 6 weeks. Next slide. So in May 2020, the voters approved the Metro Supportive Housing Measure. And since that time, we came to you in June when we requested to convene a 21-member local implementation planning committee, which was required by the measure. And that committee has convened 5 times. And that committee is to give us high-level advice to the staff and to the board regarding the plan. Also, an internal staff team has been meeting to share information from various stakeholder groups and specific work groups. For example, we met last week with James Schroeder, the CEO of HealthShare of Oregon, to speak to our internal group regarding HealthShare's activities and to possibly coordinate regarding the supportive housing services measure. And so we're learning to help guide the county's work moving forward from a variety of stakeholders. The housing staff also created a website to keep the public informed of all of our planning activities and meetings, and staff has been meeting with various stakeholder groups and individuals interested in the supportive housing services program. And we're making a lot of progress regarding the development of the LIP. We also convened 2 consultants to help us with this work, with staff being very focused on the COVID pandemic from the HHS side, and also from housing services with the COVID and homeless and houseless work. There has been limited time for internal staff to work additionally to put this plan together in a very short period of time. So we contracted with Multicultural Collaborative, Anita Yap, to perform the community engagement with the populations who have experienced homelessness, particularly with people in communities of color and community stakeholders. She's also helping us to facilitate the 21-member LIP committee and completing the analysis of all the community engagement. We've also contracted with Corporation for Supportive Housing, Heather Lyons, to be our technical writer. You may know her or remember her from her writing and convening of the Tri-County Homeless Report about 24 months ago. We'd also like you to know that because we started this work with Heather and we have been coordinating with the Tri-County area, the other 2 counties have adopted the Washington County template for the plan so that all 3 counties will look similar in the planning effort. And then late breaking, and therefore not on this slide, program manager was just hired Friday to coordinate the planning and implementation activities of the supportive housing services program. and she'll begin on November 9th. I'm going to be scheduling meetings with each of you to meet her and to share your thoughts about the SHS program. So lots of activity has been going on since we last talked in June. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, one key aspect of our work has been ongoing with the Tri-County collaboration and coordination. And in fact, this afternoon and every Tuesday at 4:30, we meet to discuss various issues. And from these meetings, it's been very helpful to talk with the other two counties to ensure that there's alignment and regional coordination. For example, I think I mentioned the planning document that all three counties are required to submit to Metro, that these are being coordinated similarly so that the local similarly to the local implementation strategy that we did for the Affordable Housing Bond Program. So when the Metro Oversight Committee reviews all three plans, they will look very much alike. These meetings have also allowed the three counties to discuss important topics such as data collection and how to collect it best for this regional program. Currently, we've been collecting it on a county-by-county basis, and that's contributed some silos in the work that each of the county does. So this is a different way to capture the individuals who maybe temporarily reside in different communities in the Tri-County regional area. And one of the great things about the SHS measure, it allows a person to choose where they want to live and be able to access similar services. The work groups that I mentioned have begun to examine different topics, such as procurement, to make it easier for service providers who potentially may want to respond to the three different counties' requests for proposals or qualifications for very similar, if not the same, services. And more on this topic will be coming to the board as it is more defined. Similarly, we've got other work groups that are working on, for example, how rental assistance might work across the region and how we provide supportive services in other areas. Those are all the things that were being discussed and coordinated on a tri-county level. The focus of this work is to ensure from the focus population that they can receive similar services with similar requirements and have easier access to the point of entry into the homeless system. And that was one of the main concerns that we heard when we looked at Washington County, is that there was some confusion as to how to access services. Next slide, please. And this slide just shows us as a reminder of the focus group that we're attempting to provide services to. The 75% of the funding will go to those who are extremely low income with one or more disabling condition and experience or are at imminent risk of experiencing long-term frequent episodes of literal homelessness, and 25% of the funding will go to those experiencing homelessness or have a substantial risk of experiencing homelessness. Next slide, please. As we work through the local implementation plan, these are the areas that will be in that plan. And currently with our local implementation committee, we have been working on racial equity analysis. We have a big meeting on Tuesday to work on that. We have begun to convene many different stakeholder groups to discuss community engagement and what is needed. And we have also worked with different stakeholder groups and community groups who work with the homeless to do individual assessments or interviews with those folks to really understand the issues that they're experiencing in accessing services. We are completing our needs and gaps analysis, and we'll be working on our planned investments in the month of November. And as I mentioned, we'll be talking about regional access and coordination. And I mentioned also the procurement plan that we're working on regionally and the geographic equity. Next slide, please. So let's discuss the timeline. Since September, we created the template for the plan. We also have engaged in a lot of discussions and presentations to the Continuum of Care, the HSSN, HISN, HPAC, and other organizations like Thrives. We've also worked closely with the local implementation planning group regarding geographic equity analysis, and they've asked for a lot more information, and we are providing that information to them. In October, we began our community engagement and to receive feedback on the current homeless system, as well as what is needed in the plan. And when I talk about the interventions of housing and services, what I'm talking about in terms of one of the things that the local implementation planning committee told us is we'd like to have consistent definitions so that when we're talking about homelessness or we're talking about the 75%, we all are talking about the same thing. And so we have spent a lot of time making sure that we have definitions for a lot of the work that we're doing. And then this last week, we went over the metrics and the outcomes that have been given to us by Metro with the local implementation planning group, and asked them for their feedback and whether or not they thought there should be any additional metrics and outcomes. And so this month, in November, we're going to be completing the community engagement report and presenting it to the board. We're going to be completing the racial equity analysis and the current investment analysis and planned investments. And hopefully by early December, we'll have a procurement strategy developed that we can bring to you. In December, we want to bring the first draft of the local implementation plan to the board. And we also want to make sure that we talk to the board about the integration of the Metro Affordable Housing Bond Program with the Supportive Housing Program. And then once the board reviews the first draft, we'd like to take that out for public comment. And at this point, we have planned 2.5 weeks for that. And that's one of the things I'd like to discuss with you today, because we're now running up against the holidays. And in early January, we will have a final draft to the board and send that final draft to Metro for approval. Now, the local implementation plan is tied to the intergovernmental agreement, the IGA. And so the IGA will not be signed by Washington County and Metro until sometime late March or early May. And that's to get us ready to start the program in June. So with that, I will stop there and see if there are any questions.
Chair Harrington, can I ask, I think, Ruth, you may have an alternative timeline.
Yes.
Can we go to that, please, and can you talk through that?
Sure. Here's the first plan with the 2.5 weeks. And the difference here is that we've added a third meeting with the Board of Commissioners, and we have, so that if you want to see, if the board wants to see a third draft, we have built that into this timeline. We did not do that in the original timeline. So that gets us to the final approval on February the 1st. or February the 2nd. And then the next slide is we inserted a third board meeting. And then we also extended the public comment period for 4 weeks. And that gets us to submitting the plan to Metro by February the 12th.
So this is Chair Harrington. I have some pretty burning thoughts and questions, but I'm more than welcome to have my colleagues start off first with your questions and comments, if you like.
I just soon hear your burning questions. This some of them overlap with, I don't know if burning, but.
Okay, well, mine are.
You want to go ahead.
This is a really important program, and we have great folks working here in Washington County and in the region. This gift of funding from the voters across the region is the first of its kind in this arena. It is expected to provide funding that will help us make transformational steps in addressing the needs of our community, much like the Affordable Housing Bond. With the Affordable Housing Bond, we, like this program, have staff who have worked with partners to deliver. But there is a significant difference of scale between the two programs. This board, as well as the Metro Council, have a lot on the line. And we need to make sure that everyone on this board understands the ins and outs of the local implementation plan for this 10-year funded program. I think our staff has made some good progress over these months, particularly with regard to the collaboration amongst our multiple departments here in the county, as this program has our HHS team and our housing and homelessness teams working far more collaboratively than in the past, as we learned several weeks ago, but also working collaboratively across the region, as Ruth has given us a good overview around data collection, coordinated services, and improving access. I don't like either of these timelines for different reasons. I'm really glad to know of the progress since June, and that includes the website, to which, until this packet was published, I had no reason, I knew nothing of it, and didn't know to go to it. And guess what? There's great information there. There is good work going on, and this board needs to be on the journey more so than it has been. Information that has been worked on already around metrics and outcomes is information that I believe this board is going to be held accountable to by voters and needs to be given the opportunity to better understand and appreciate, more so than just a one-stop of an LIP plan that's going to go out for public comment for maybe 2 to 4 weeks over a holiday time period. So I want to make sure that this board has and receives at least a first crack at this document that provides a table of contents and a structure of what needs to be accomplished, how you're planning on going about it, and when do you plan to do so. You need to fully avail yourselves of having one-on-ones with board members for those who wish a desire or have the desire for a walkthrough and Q&A, in addition to work sessions where we can have discussion with one another and hear one another's questions. We're going to need said documents 2 weeks before such work sessions. This is the most critical expansion of services ever in our region. I know that we've got a great team and that they can do this and will do this, but we need to make sure we're on the journey together and that we know to our core that we're going to be successful with this. And guess what? Right now, I'm really worried because I'm not there. And I don't see how I'm going to be successful at being there because I can't cram another 5 pounds of flour into the 2-pound sack. And I know our community, it makes no sense to plan a public comment period over the holidays. You just have to take it off the table. So you can have a document ready by the middle of December, but nobody's going to read it until January 4th. And this program is so important that we need to have 4 weeks of community engagement. So, sorry, but I'm throwing the timeline out the door and saying we need to come up with something better because I know we can. I know we can. And guess what? This means that I am totally willing and able to go toe-to-toe with anybody I need to, including Metro Council President Lynn Peterson, to let her know, to let them know that we are absolutely committed to this program and we're going to make sure we're doing it well and right. Not only here in Washington County, but with our regional partners. I think you have good progress towards that end. That's a great story. But we need to be successful in completing our approach through the LIP and making sure that all 5 members of the board understand the why, what, fors, and how because of the level of responsibility and accountability that we have to the voters. And that I know that each of you as public servants have as well, because you're awesome at what you do and you're very passionate and you're truly the topic experts. We want to be right there with you. So I'm trying to be motivational about this because I'm not discouraged at all about what you can do. I don't want you to feel so bound by an initial time frame such that it will jeopardize our success together on a multi-year journey. So Commissioner Willie, I'm going to put you on the spot. Does my thoughts on this make sense?
Well, actually, yeah, you were going the same direction I was going, obviously a little bit more in depth and passionate, but I completely agree with you. This process concerns me. I remember when we went through a similar process with the affordable housing, and I had some concerns about that. I do about this as well. There's a number of things that I really don't understand, and I want to make sure that we do exactly what you say, that we identify the needs that our county needs, not only as well as a regional need. And if we need to take more time to do that, I'm certainly more than willing to agree with you on that.
You heard it here first, folks.
I could be a bug on the wall for your conversation with Lynn Peterson on that, but anyway, and I don't know how much flexibility that is, and I'd have to look again at the second expanded timeline. I haven't really paid any attention to that, so. But anyway, long answer. I'm sorry. I would agree. I agree with your concerns, and certainly think we need to make sure we get this right.
Chair Harrington, I'd like to say.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for the gift of time because we have been very concerned about the timeline. And we were working toward the initial timeline given to us, which was the end of December. But since that time, in talking to our regional partners, it we know that, and we've told them, we don't think that we can meet the December deadline, and we were going to have that discussion with you.
Well, the
I've
other
also
thing
got-
is, they're going to require of you to have an LIP that we adopt.
Exactly,
And I need a plan
exactly.
that I agree with to get there.
And so one of the discussions that I've had with Metro is that we can take the extra time. We want to take the extra time, one, to make sure that we have a very good plan and that there's board input and community input, and that the community engagement piece of it is robust. This time, it's been a little bit more difficult for us to do the community engagement like we did the Affordable Housing Bond Program, just because we're in these unusual times. But one of the things that I discussed with Metro was that, and it's significant, is that the plan has to be attached to the IGA, and the IGAs will not be done until April. So that gives us more time, not too much more time, but more time that I feel comfortable that if we take the additional time that you're willing to give us, that we would have a very solid program by the mid to late February.
Well, I don't know that yet, because this is not in isolation, and we have to plug this in with everything else on our
Exactly.
plate. So that's really the good framework, but we've got to figure this out.
So Chair Harrington, I just want to indicate before I make my comments, we haven't heard from Commissioner Rogers or Commissioner Treese.
Right.
I would actually recommend that I work with Deputy Administrator Ruth in contacting Metro and talking more through that timeline to understand what are those dates, because as Ruth indicated, those dates have changed, but that really needs to determine what our timeline is. Clearly heard at this point the community engagement concerns, and we do have time on the agenda in upcoming meetings for supportive housing, so we can look at how to stage these conversations with the board to get you the information that's been requested so far from you, Chair Harrington and Commissioner Willie.
Let me help you and serve as a liaison for this board.
Okay.
Because the board is your audience. And that's one of the big messages I want folks to hear today. Commissioner Rogers and Commissioner Treese.
Pam, you want to go first, or?
You go ahead.
Yeah, that's, your thoughts, Chair, is exactly what my thoughts were. Listening to this, for the last year and a half, we have been on a complete squirrel wheel of topics and issues, and things are coming at us so quickly that it's impossible to have any thoughtful and meaningful depth of understanding. So I understand it's probably common in the legislature and Congress where they get bills at midnight and then vote on them at 8 the next morning. But I think we want to be a little bit more thoughtful about this sort of thing. And so I really am for spending the time and getting it right.
First of all, thank you, Ruth, for your presentation. But one of my big concerns is getting the public comment period into a position where we actually have public comment. I'm worried about it being over the holidays if we rush too much. So again, I sit in the same position as the chair, as Commissioner Willie and Commissioner Rogers. I think we need to slow it down a little bit and do it right.
Thank you.
Do it to success, I think is what we're all looking for. Ms. Angie and Ms. Asuno?
So based on this conversation, staff will convene and then schedule upcoming time with the board and lay out what a pathway of conversations are. And Chair, I will be in contact with you. And thank you for your offer to be the liaison from the board standpoint to Metro.
And I also think on the elements of the LIP that it's required that the staff put together and understand the planned investments, regional access coordination, procurement plan, and geographic equity. And I would assert that this board is going to want to understand those 4 key pieces as well. And we have to figure out a means to take this board on that journey without issuing us the whole set of Britannica, Encyclopedia Britannicas in one fell swoop. We need to make it palatable, or digestible. It's already palatable, but we have to be able to digest it.
And we can do that. We can take those pieces out.
So sorry to hit you with that, but I think it's gonna be awesome when we get the first iteration of this all documented and cranked up and going. It's going to be pretty darned amazing.
We have a great opportunity, and I think that's what we're making sure we seize that opportunity, right? Correct?
Yeah, I think so. Comey, I'm looking forward to another bouquet.
Well, we are working on a bouquet, but I can't guarantee how beautiful it will be.
It's going to be a beautiful garden. I know that. I know it will be. So we just need to
Thank you,
make
Chair.
sure we're planting all the different perennials and annuals and so forth. So it'll be good. Great.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for your comments. Appreciate them very much. I think the staff is going to receive them very well. We've been quite concerned about the timing, especially around the holidays. So thank you for that.
Okay, so I don't know about you, but I need at least a 10-minute bio break. And then, Ms. Angie, we have to figure out between yourself and Ms. Diane Taniguchi-Dennis for Clean Water Services how we're able to approach these next 2 topics.
So we have been in electronic conversations, so cell phones are a beautiful thing. So Lisa Tattersall will be going next, and her presentation is no more than 7 minutes, and then allowing some time for board question thereafter. And then Diane had indicated her item will go relatively quickly.
Okay, all righty. So Commissioner Rogers and Commissioner Treese, are you okay with a 10-minute break? Okay, we'll see you back here at 4:23. Big smile. See you soon.
4:23 our time, whatever your time is.
Well, I remembered yesterday to finally turn my watch forward. I got one of my clocks in my office set forward this morning, but I still have a second clock in my office.
Well, I really hope you're turning them back, but.
Anyway, I told them probably less than 15.
Oh, yeah.
Tanya and I.
Because I've been sending her emails.
I just got your text, was just texting somebody else. So she and I text back and forth. Okay, I'll give it to you.
I mean, I don't want to give it.
Hey, come on, I've been waiting all day for your report on this. Come on.
Oh, I know, it's
It
money.
will-
Okay,
it will be
I'll
the
show
most
you, I'll show you a
interesting
picture of that guy.
It will be the most interesting.
I know, I've been excited. It's
I know,
where
it's
it
money,
comes
it's
from.
always about money.
Right, budgets and numbers and stuff.
Right?
Yeah.
Is that him?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's his store.
Uh-huh.
Isn't it nice?
Is that him?
Yeah,
He looks exactly like
like his papa.
Yeah, he does.
Yeah, but it's a
So
fun
funny.
store. So it's all this fabric, and
Mm-hmm.
so that's Cameron. So he's trying some clothes on cam. But it's just fun.
Yeah.
I mean, because he's a big boy, and it's hard to find Texas.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the fabric.
You know what? I think I have 3 tuxedos. Now that was back in the day when I used to wear tuxedos to these events a lot more. I haven't worn a tux for a while, but yeah, so having a great tux. He's great. Yeah, be able to use it for a long
Oh,
time.
yeah, well, he gets these, he goes to these events, right?
Oh, yeah.
And these, because he's in entertainment, yeah. So he
You
wears
gotta be
tuxedos.
styling,
I know.
You gotta have a good touch.
She's Martin, so this is
Huh?
this is Thelma Schoonmaker. She did all of Martin Scorsese's movies.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so she's an editor.
Well, all right.
She was
yeah.
just a young editor, and since we have that time, then what we can do is substitute, for example, the metrics, because we can't change that. That's given to us, but at least it gives them an understanding of what Metro wants us to get done. But we've been told by Metro that can't change. We presented that to the LIP, and the LIPs, we asked them, we can't change this, but do you want to add anything? And they said no.
Okay, but I still think, we still gotta, so what I'm seeing, and maybe this is because I'm visual, we need to lay out what the longest runway possible.
Okay.
For a timeline. And then what are all the pieces we have to address along that timeline? And so because we're over here, we're gonna talk with the board about the data and metrics, which are already know, so, but they can still provide input on that, correct?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So this is,
So
this
we
is,
will, I'll
yeah.
break it out.
But this has to be a full, long timeline.
With all the elements.
All the things.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we're, you know what, Tanya, we're barely there in terms of now, with all of the work that we've done, we're barely there that we can start pulling out the elements and doing that. We could not have done that before today.
Yeah, I just think we have to show them what this looks like, because they don't know what this looks like. That's what they're asking. Show us the picture of what the process is.
Okay.
And then have the deep dive into each of the elements on the process. So taking them along on that journey.
Okay. Okay, and that's different from what we do with the affordable housing loan program.
Yeah, they're asking for something.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, this is much more significant.
Yep.
Well, not really, because, well, yeah, it is, because, it's about the, it's about 3 times more money, but with the affordable housing loan program, we can do it a lot faster.
I need to step outside. I've been in here too.
I'm getting more comfortable.
I got a little cold, so I had to put a sweatshirt on.
Me too, me too. So what time do you think we're going to be done?
Hopefully no more than 25 minutes, but we will.
Don't tell anybody, but I'm knitting.
I wish I could make things myself, but I'm not.
These are
I'm not
little
that
Santa
coordinated.
Clauses.
Oh, so cute.
It's gonna be a pillow. So
Oh,
but don't tell anybody.
no worries.
And I've got my iPad going on the side here, trying to watch some of the results coming in.
Hey, Kevin. Commissioner
Wait,
Willie
are we
wants to
going?
make sure you guys know that people are still listening to you. You can't hide your knitting in your cold sweatshirts and stuff.
Sorry.
Pam
I'm
changed
comfortable.
clothes.
Pam did. Pam was a little chilly.
Oh, man.
Yep.
Oh. Okay.
To be prepared when we leave the building today. Oh, okay, okay,
I don't think we're supposed to stay around either.
okay.
I think we're supposed to get better.
Oh, I haven't paid attention to the weather. And I need to start training myself too, or I'm gonna wake up someday and we'll have ice. Oh, holy smokes. What did I do?
Thank you. You guys have had an epic day. Thank you for hanging in there with me.
Thank you for contributing that word, Lisa. Epic. It's been an epic day.
Leave it to a librarian.
Yeah,
Well, welcome back, everyone. It's 4:23, and we're going to sprint through the remainder of the agenda because we can.
Yes. Okay, can you, sorry. How's that?
Terrific.
Okay.
So Commissioner Rogers and Commissioner Treese, we're here with Lisa Tattersall. Can you see the slides okay? Yep. Excellent. Great. Take it away, Lisa.
I'm going to go as fast as I can. Okay, so just some quick context to how we got here today. In June, and I'm talking about the proposal to eliminate overdue fines from the libraries in Washington County. In June, the library directors discussed and supported this proposal. We brought it to the executive board. In July, they are advisory to you, the Board of Commissioners. And then in September, they voted to bring this recommendation to you, and that is why I'm here today. Next slide, please. I won't read this whole thing to you because it's your resolution to racial justice, but we believe this effort is helping to make this happen in library land. Okay, so how do overdue fines currently work? Currently, due to COVID, no fines are being assessed. So the information I'm going to share now is what was happening pre-COVID. So if a library item for adults or young adults, teens, is held past its due date, libraries charge 25 cents a day for most items, up to a maximum of $5. Items for kids do not accrue fines, and that's been a couple of years now that we've had that in place. Borrowing privileges are suspended on accounts with $19.99 or more in outstanding fines and fees, and these accounts are considered blocked until the amount on the account is reduced below that $19.99 threshold. We send bills to users when an item is overdue for 25 days, and accounts may be sent to a collection agency, but this does not get credit reported. Next slide, please. There are lots of myths about library overdue fines, and I'll be addressing those in the rest of the presentation. And here's just a rundown of a couple of those main myths. One is that overdue fines ensure items are returned on time. Another myth is that fines keep items circulating so they're available for others. Another myth is that they build a sense of civic responsibility, or it's just a couple of bucks, what's the big deal? And also that they're an important source of revenue for a library. So I'm going to address all of those myths as we go through this presentation. Next slide. Okay, I'm going to take a breath. The reality of library overdue fines is really different for families living in poverty. Rather than sort of a feel-good lesson for middle-class kids in civic responsibility, fines become a barrier to library use. When I was a frontline library worker, I would often hear parents tell their kids, just pick out one book because that's all we can afford in case you lose it. And that's a really heartbreaking thing to hear. For many families, it means they don't come into the library at all. Because if you have to choose between food or overdue fines, you're going to choose food. And so research from the Urban Libraries Council shows that communities of color are more likely to be impacted by unpaid library fees, this is a quote, and are grappling with a higher percentage of suspended library cards. Overdue library fees disproportionately affect communities that have income insecurity or individuals with low income. Late fees add up and become insurmountable for some families when forced to choose between paying the fee or buying food. Next slide, please. Data from large cities around the country that have already eliminated overdue fines shows that poverty, race, and fine-related barriers to library access are linked. So I have a bunch of quotes from studies done in San Francisco, Seattle, and New York. I'm just gonna choose one because they're all about the same. So in Seattle, the branches with the highest proportion of accounts blocked for overdue fines are all in parts of the city that are both poorer and more diverse than the city as a whole. And next slide will show that that's similar to Washington County. This chart shows the percentage of library user accounts blocked due to fines over 1999 by library building. The countywide average is 7%. And you can see here that in Washington County, the highest branches are Shoe Park, Cornelius, Forest Grove, and those are communities with a higher proportion of Latinx residents, and they tend to have, unfortunately, the highest average number of accounts blocked due to fines. I'm not picking on Hillsborough, they're just a unique case because they have two very different neighborhoods and they're one system. So Hillsborough Shoe Park is at 14%, but if you look at Brookwood, it's 6%, and that's the same staffing, same HR, the same way they enforce policies. And so you can see those disparities.
That's totally based on neighborhood.
Yeah.
You know, I was on the library board for years and things like that. Shoot parks, library inventory is considerably different than Brookwood's.
Absolutely, they try to meet the needs of the community that they're in. Yep, thank you. One of the common questions is, will people actually return materials on time if we get rid of fines? So when Chicago Public Library eliminated overdue fines, they saw a 240% increase in return books in the month after. So that's great, because all we really want is our books back so that they can circulate to more people. In Salt Lake City, late returns actually dropped after fines were eliminated. And in a library district in Colorado, their data shows that 95% of materials are returned within a week of the due date. So I think people they're already committed to the whole mission of the library and the sharing when they use it. And so I think that's enough of a motivator for most people to get things back. Will libraries lose revenue? The shorter answer is yes. They will lose some revenue. However, overdue fine revenue has already been shrinking, so there's no fines right now on kids' materials, and digital titles do not accrue fines, and those have been growing at a huge rate. We collect about 75% of the overdue fines we assess, so there's always a gap there between what's assessed and what's collected. And libraries in their discussion really agreed that the lost revenue is less important than the gains in equitable access. Just for some metro area context, Multnomah County eliminated overdue fines in July of this year. Fort Vancouver eliminated them in 1970, so they are way ahead of the curve. And Clackamas County still does charge overdue fines. Next slide. So effective, what our proposal is that effective January 22nd, 2021, WCCLS libraries eliminate the collection of overdue fines, that we delete existing overdue fines on accounts, and we also eliminate the use of a collection agency because that can appear really punitive and it's pretty scary to cure from a collection agency. We would also develop an extensive public communication effort to invite users back. And we would continue to charge replacement fees for items lost or damaged because it is all about just making sure those materials are available. And libraries would keep equity at the forefront when working with patrons who have items outstanding. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to slow down for this one because there's a lot of numbers. So this graph shows a couple of things. So the chart on the left shows the number of users who would have fines removed from their accounts. So over 100,000 accounts would have over $1.4 million in fines waived. Over 200,000 accounts currently have no fines. And all of this data I should add as a snapshot from June. And so we would have updated numbers, but I wanted to have consistent numbers as this proposal went through the process. The bar on the right shows, so there's a total of 24,000, give or take, accounts in the system that have over $20 in fines currently. And so after waiving 1.4 million, 12,200 people would have library access restored. 11,832 people would still be blocked because even though they're getting some stuff waived, they still have lost item charges on their account that are over $20. And those are the people that library directors are committed to working with in a communication campaign in an equitable way to try and bring them back to use the library. Okay. The other thing I wanted to share is so that when users have fines, they can either pay them in person at the library or at an online payment portal at wccls.org that we host at the county here. So WCCLS is proposing to distribute the net revenue we collect online to our libraries to help offset the revenue loss that they are going to see from not being able to collect fines at their buildings. And that is about $70,000. That covers the cost of what it costs us to provide the service. So we're cost neutral or cost recovery. But then after that, the $70K is the net, and that would go to them. If this is something that you'd like to do, that would be a future consent agenda item for you as a board. Okay, I went really fast. That was it. I think I did. Did I hit 7?
I didn't time it. You did great.
I did. You were 3 minutes off, but that's okay.
I was going to say, we started at 23 and it's 33, so yeah.
Yeah, it's okay.
All right.
Commissioners, any questions or comments? Commissioner Rogers.
Yep, question and comment. The comment is, I'm fine with waiving the fees in certain circumstances for what you suggested, but I need to understand what you said. So if people just say, well, it's waived, I'm not going to return materials, books, whatever they might be, if they're not returning those materials, they'll still pay something. I mean, you're not just saying that's waiving for all unreturned items. Did I get that right?
You got that correct. So we're only talking about the overdue fees, so what we charge if you're late in bringing something back. But if you never bring it back, or if you lose it, you drop it in the bathtub or whatever, then we are still going to be charging you for the replacement cost for that item.
Okay, and then my second question is and so I'm fine with that. What incentive or disincentive, I guess, is there to somebody to say, well, you're not going to charge me a fine anyway? I'll never, I'm going to return it 2 months from now because we have limited editions of some materials. So what are we doing to spur getting those back just so that others can borrow them?
Right. The good thing is that for systems who've already done this, the data shows that in general, like that one system in Colorado, 95% of items are returned within a week. But there is that 5% that we need to think about. And so there are special items, like, for example, the libraries have library of things like you can order like a keyboard or a hot air fryer or whatever. And so we'll have a different set of policy for those high value items. What we're talking about is really for like your garden variety books, DVDs, and the majority of what we circulate.
Good, thank you. I just encourage you to keep saying, what do we do for those who just completely keep them for long periods of time? Maybe it's a travel guide, maybe it's something that somebody else wants to look at. and they-
Absolutely. And things will go to build as lost after 25 days. So even if they hold it for 25 days, like they don't return it, then it flips over from overdue into lost. And then that's the category at which those fines stick on their account. Was that the missing piece? Got it. Okay, great.
Got it, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Lisa, thank you for your presentation. To Commissioner Rogers' point, I think, first of all, you guys do a great job when you're checking out materials online to show how many people are waiting in line for that book. So there is a high awareness of whether or not there's, you holding it for extra time means that somebody else doesn't get it. So, I think that really helps in this process. The other thing that I want to mention is the degree to we can get people who don't have resources to utilize the services that we have. To me, that's the real key, and that's the beauty of our library system. So I really appreciate the fact that you and the advisory board are bringing this forward, are being proactive, and are really looking to make the utilization of our books at a greater level. That we're pushing the utilization up. Right up among those who don't have those type of resources. So I'm pleased. I'm very supportive of this.
Yeah, I think way back when, it seems to me, again, when I was on the Hillsborough Library Board, we had, seems like 1 month a year that we would go fine-free month or whatever. What is it when you give up?
Food for fines, maybe, like where you would bring a donation for the food bank or something, and then it would.
Well, this was just, if you just bring it back, we'll waive the.
Oh, amnesty.
Amnesty,
Yeah,
that's what it is. Thank you for that word, I had for some reason. And I don't know exactly how successful that was. It seemed to me that they liked it. I'm not opposed to what you're proposing here. I have some concerns, like Commissioner Rogers does, that there'll be no longer an incentive to bring that item back. Like you said, once it goes 25 days, then it goes lost, so maybe they bring it back on the 24th day. Okay, well, at least we have it. So yeah, I think we could certainly test this program out and see what see if it does what we think it should do.
Thank you. And a quick note, I know a lot of people consider when they get their overdue bill, they see it as a donation to the library. And so some people are actually upset when we take it away because that's how they felt they were contributing to library services. And so I think that's a really interesting point. And so one of the things we'll be looking at when we have our communication plan is just directing people to donate online to the Friends of the Library, or, there's other ways. We can still do food drives in the library whenever we get back into the buildings like we used to be. But there's creative ways to sort of address that as well. Thank you.
I'm all thumbs up.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for your support.
Great. Keep up the good work.
Okay. Thank you.
All righty. Thanks for being with us, Lisa.
Yep.
And Kathy, there you are. Just for the expediency of time, Kathy, if you wouldn't mind using one of the sides versus the front, and just rock and roll.
All right. We're going to finish the day with numbers.
Because we haven't had enough of numbers today.
It's not even yet, so good afternoon, Chair Harrington and the board, yes. My name is Kathy Leader. I'm the Chief Financial Officer with Clean Water Services. And I'm here this afternoon to provide an update on the district's current financial performance through September 30th, 2020. In response to the economic impacts to customers in the district service area, the district took steps during the budget process to mitigate these impacts, including deferring of planned rate and fee increases, delaying and sequencing of capital investments, prioritization and sequencing of hiring of current vacant positions and new positions, and reducing travel, training costs, and other operating costs that can be delayed or deferred. The board directed staff at that time to provide an update on the district's operations during the year to support decisions on staffing adds, capital investments, and future rate increases. I'd like to start by providing an update on the district's results of operations for fiscal year in June 30, 2020. which is the basis of the beginning fund balance in the current fiscal year. With the start of the pandemic in the final quarter of fiscal year 20, there was concern that delinquencies would increase and customer collections would decline. Revenues collected by CWS in 20 increased by 4.9%, and wholesale city customer collections increased by 4.7% as compared to the prior fiscal year. This increase is consistent with historical averages of 4.5% to 5% and reflects rate increases in customer growth. On the expenditure side, the district spent 84% of their approved operating budget, which is slightly lower than the historic average of 87% and is a $12 million savings to the district. Capital spending was at 75% of approved budget, which is also in line with the historical average of 74%. This is a $12 million savings, a $20 million savings for the district. The increase in revenues and related reduction in spending resulted in an increase in non-restricted reserves of $4.7 million and an increase in restricted reserves related to system development charges of $7 million. Next slide. This graph shows the percentage of budgeted revenues collected by quarter for fiscal year 2018, 2019, 2020, and first quarter 21. The dotted line reflects the 3-year average of percentage collected by quarter. The district revenue collections are spread fairly evenly over the year, as you can expect, as these are service fees. Fees collected were 25% for the first quarter, 49% on average for the second quarter, 75% for the third quarter, and just over 100% at year end. For first quarter 2021, collections were 25% of budgeted, which is in line with the 3-year average. So collections look really good in this first quarter of 21. Next slide. This graph shows the percentage of budgeted expenditures for both operating and capital spent by quarter for the same years, 2018, 2019, and 2020, and the first quarter of 21. The dotted line also reflects the 3-year average of percentage spent by quarter. The average for first quarter is 15%. Historically, the average second quarter, 37%, third quarter, 55%, and fourth quarter, 81%. The district historically spends 81% of amounts budgeted for both operating and capital.
And Q3 and Q4 were in calendar 20, or the blue ones, sorry, I'm not being very clear, right?
So the gray bar is 18.
Right.
The green bar is 19, and the blue bar is 20, and the orange is 21.
Right, so during COVID, for the fiscal year, that means,
Tightened our belt.
yep,
Mm-hmm.
yep, and it shows here with the 55 and the 79, right? Okay, I'm seeing that right then, thank you. And Commissioner Treese and Commissioner Rogers, I can't see you on the screen right now, so if you have any questions, just jump in.
And so
Good, thank you.
excuse me, was there a question? No. Okay. For first quarter 2021, the district spent 15% of amount budgeted on expenditures, which is in line with the 3-year average. So we're on track for first quarter. Next slide. This slide shows a comparison of first quarter revenues collected by year to give you a better idea of how the revenues are split by type. The purple colored line maps the capital and operating expenditures that's overlaid the revenue there. For fiscal year 21, we are seeing a decline in system development charges collected for both clean water services and by the member cities as compared to the prior year. However, as you can see, operating and capital costs are also down when compared to the prior year. Chair Harrington?
So I need to make sure I understand the labeling. You mean there are clean water services direct customers like the UUAs versus the customers, they're still getting clean water service customers, but they're in cities, so they see it through the city billing.
Yeah, so
Okay,
a customer
got it.
for the city would come into the city, pay their connection fee, and then the city would remit to us.
Got it.
For a share.
Okay, thank you.
So, and then there's the operating overlay, which is also showing a decline, though. So along with some of our system development charges declining, we also see that our operating declined somewhat from the prior year, which is good. So to kind of sum that up, the increase in unrestricted reserves of the 4.7 million from the fiscal year 20 operations, and the results of first quarter collections and spending, which are in line with budget. This is allowing the district to plan for and stage selected capital investments and to bring forward to the board planned staffing adds. Next slide. You may recognize this slide from the budget hearings. It shows the impact of deferring rate increases. If the planned rate increase was made in July of 2020 at 4.6%, the average rate increase over time would be 4.8% to meet planned future operating and capital investments. With the planned increase deferred, the average rate of increase over time would increase by 5.5% to meet those future needs. So that's basically what that graph's depicting for you. Next slide. The forecast projects fund balance is declining in fiscal year 20 due to the no rate increase at this point. Our forecast shows the impact of delayed rate increases as we see reserves decline slightly over time, even with future planned rate increases. However, the district management will continue to sequence capital investments and staffing adds in response to the financial operating indicators. I should also note that the forecast that's depicted here results include very conservative estimates on revenue and system development charge collections and more aggressive on capital spending as it reflects our existing capital improvement plan. Next slide. So from this presentation going forward, so our next steps will be in November 10th. We're going to have a work session, and ECOR Northwest is going to update the board on the regional economic impact of COVID-19. November 17th, we have another work session. It'll be for rates and charges update to discuss proposed rate increases. As you remember, we adopted our rates through December 31st, so January 1, we need to either maintain or adopt increases. And on December 1st, we'll have, at our regular meeting, we'll hold a public hearing on the rates and charges that we give direction on. And that concludes my presentation, so I open up for any questions you might have.
Commissioner Treese and Commissioner Rogers.
I don't really have any questions, Kathy. What should I ask that I'm not thinking of right now? It looks like you figured out the trending, but is there any surprises? What would be the thing that might change that we ought to know about? What concerns?
Well, for our customer base, as we see some of these benefit packages ending at January 1, we might have some people that right now they have the utility assistance, they have rent assistance. Some of those programs, hopefully they will be continued through legislative action, but if not, we might have some customers that then are going to have issues in paying.
That's the only one?
Yeah.
Just the collection?
Diane wants to contribute something, Roy.
Right.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so we really do need to watch what's going on in this next quarter. Kathy will have more data in January, so we can see what's happened through December. We are watching because of the issues related to if there's another stimulus package or et cetera that helps homeowners. But so far, the data is looking a lot better than we had anticipated, and it seems to be holding strong. The drinking water purveyors are seeing a very different reality because they saw consumption drop off pretty significantly. Normally, their sales during the summer is pretty strong because of irrigation. They didn't see that. So our drinking water partners are seeing a very different picture that they're reporting. One of the things that will adjust for the ratepayers is their winter averages. More people are home as opposed to out, so it will be interesting to see how the winter averaging shifts for the sanitary sewer customers. So Kathy and her team is monitoring that right now. So, where the ship is looking okay, so that's the message we wanted to give, but certainly this could turn depending on what happens during the winter.
But can I verify the message first? We took a very cautious approach, and held rates, which meant that we have accepted for ourselves that we're going to have to make up for that with steeper rate increases over time. So things have worked out in a way that we had predicted, which is really pretty good given the extent of uncertainty we had. But we are still in this position where we're going to have to do some somewhat painful things. What we just don't know yet is if our community is going to be further impacted, such as you've described, to know if the community will be able to pick up with those future pains or not. Am I right?
Exactly,
Okay,
yes.
the other thing I'm not 100% clear on is you've laid out that Kathy will be coming back in January with another round of information, but this proposal has us in these next steps potentially adopting a change of rates effective in January. So we'd have to take the action on December 1st. So are we going to wait until the Eco Northwest presentation and then you come back on the 17th to see if we continue on?
Yes.
Okay.
Because depending on what we hear on November 10th and the potential, what we think about other stimulus holding the economy strong, we may decide to do the rate increase in January. But if the feeling is that we need a little bit more of a break, then you would choose to do the rate increase for July 1st. The oddity of doing it in January is you would end up with 2 rate increases back to back, right? You would have one in January, and then you would have another one in July to keep back on track. So we'll be talking about that strategy on November 17th, but we're real eager to see and hear what John Tapania has to say. But we are seeing a decline in the systems development charges. So that tells us that there's a bit of a tapping of the brake on growth. So that's something we're also monitoring.
So I was just trying to leverage off of what I heard you respond to Commissioner Rogers' question, so that I could absorb that answer correctly. Commissioner Treese.
I think that, Chair, you asked the question I was asking. I wasn't sure what the timing piece was and how that all fell out, but now I understand kind of the midway piece and then January as well. So thank you.
Okay.
And the other thing I would just say is, even though I'm glad you're keeping an eye on the drinking water folks and what's happening there, because I would guess that the effects of the summertime are lessening in relationship to what they're experiencing with their rates. Am I right or no?
So the drinking water folks have very large indebtedness that they've incurred, right? Big bond measures. So they actually need to continue with their rate increases. It compounds it a little bit more when they're having contraction in their consumption. So, but they're on track to do their rate increases in January. So Mark has something he'd like to add.
Another nuance related to drinking water versus wastewater rates is drinking water rates are much more timely. So they're able to bill you based on what you used in the last 30 or 60 days, right? Although our rates are based in part on consumption, we take an average of consumption between November and April, and then on July 1st, we set your rate for the entire next year. So we have a consistent rate during this current fiscal year that's coming in, where the drinking water folks will see a lot more variability based on water usage. The other thing is typically a water bill is got a much smaller base. So we're 65% base, 35% use. Water utilities often are just the opposite. So a reduction in water has a greater impact on their revenue than it would on us.
Commissioner Willie.
I'm going to have to pay more attention to my bill.
Well, funny you would ask, because I did inquire in our household bill. I was curious about COVID, but the big learning was still adjusting to the fact that we went from having multiple houses here with landscaping to one where we have no irrigation for landscaping, because we essentially have no landscaping.
Oh, mine, the water provider is City of Hillsborough.
Yep.
And obviously, Clean Water Services does their billing with the City of Hillsborough, so it all comes together. So if anybody would complain to the City of Hillsborough about their bill getting bigger, they'd go, well, no, wait a minute, we're two different entities here, so they'd have to walk them through that. But your point about the base 65%, 35%, that's an interesting thing, because you're exactly correct. The water is driven by usage. And like I said, I've never paid much attention to my Clean Water Services part of it, so I'll have to go look at that a little bit more closely. But yeah, interesting stuff. I can tell you that this year my water bills were higher, but it's because I have 5 people living in my house, not 2. And I'd probably think some of my Clean Water Services was consistent with that as well for the 35%. So, yeah.
Although that won't be reflected until next July. So you'll be paying for that on the sewer side starting next July, because we're looking at your water usage right now with your children and grandchildren and everyone else in your house.
So, I don't know, I was hoping I was paying as I was going. I was hoping.
Oh, you're gonna pay for that next
Yes,
year too.
but only for November through April, so you're going to go on vacation for a couple of weeks. So
Yeah, there you go.
yeah, there you go. Sorry, just teasing you a little bit.
I know.
So,
I'm good. That's a very good presentation. Thank you, Kathleen. So.
great.
Thank you, Kathy.
So we're going to learn more. Any last questions or comments, commissioners on Zoom? Nope. None here in the room. That was the last topic of the day.
Yay, we made it before 5
And
o'clock.
so guess what, folks? We are adjourned at 4:57. Woo-hoo!
All right.
Enjoy
Have a
your
good night,
evening.
Working 8 to
commissioners.
5.
Get your ballots in.
No, it's cleanwaterservices.org.
What I've got for Kathleen in my contacts, so is CO.
Washington.org. It doesn't make any sense.
No, it didn't. I'm looking at that. I'm going, this doesn't work.
No, huh? We're all
So,
cleanwaterservices.org.
I need to get her